Hello, kaiju lovers, and long time no see to my readers. I haven't posted much on my author YouTube channel in quite some time, other than when I've done a few gaming streams. But hello, I am Nathan Marchand, among other things, novelist, at one point teacher, podcaster, and with me today is Ryan, the Omni viewer Collins, a fellow writer and content creator.
Hello, everybody. Sorry
Yep.
Snazzy isn't here today, but he's off taking care of other things.
That for sure, for sure. So, for those who may not know who you are, obviously, if this was because this is going out to the Monster on Film Vault YouTube channel. Monster on Film Vault is my at this point premier podcast, and as well as my like I said, my author YouTube channel. So, for those who may not know who you are, if they're not either our fans or kaiju fans or whatever, let the peoples know who you are.
Well, even I don't know who I am some of the time.
It's a very existential question, I understand.
Indeed. But you can find me on YouTube as the Omni viewer, of course. Snazzy Chapeau, of course, is my co-host. You'll find him in various videos. And I'm also the author of a literary shared universe entitled The Tales from the Omni Vault. If you know me for anything, it's most likely for Operation Red Dragon, because most of my fans are kaiju fans, and that's my kaiju novel. But I've also got 2 Occult Mafia books, Emerald of Maddox City, Assorted Absurdities, which is a short story collection, and a space opera that's on the way.
Mm-hmm.
So keep your eyes open for that. And plenty more to come after that.
Yeah, all that to say, you got credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is going to be kind of an Omni viewer video, because you're going to be sharing the video version of this on your channel later on. It's not going live out there yet because we didn't want to share your credentials with me to make StreamYard happen. So, but that's neither here nor there. And this is it's basically a YouTube exclusive for MIFV. And I'm kind of sort of bringing back my old YouTube show that I called But I Digress, ellipses, because was the show I was trying to do back when I was trying to be a YouTuber. And then I discovered the joys of podcasting. And then basically switched over to podcasting. But I do enjoy doing live streams like this. And this was actually your idea, Omni. But before we get to that, we do have a few people in the chat that I would like to say hello to. So before we even started, we had Kasaibu. I think it's Kasaibu F29. He says, "Okay, you've piqued my interest." And then we have a couple of comments here from the Punk Otaku Scribe. He says, "Who?"
Us,
I don't know if he's obviously an owl or he's talking about a doctor. That one's.
He wants to know the name of the first baseman.
That true. Yes. And then he sent us a bunch of these. I'm not sure what these emoticons are.
I think it's like screaming in agony or ecstasy, or both. But it's not
possibly both. I was assuming, given the coloration, it was with the black and blue, it might be screaming into the void.
Or it might just be a grape.
It could be a grape. It could be a very angry grape. Very angry grape. The Angry Grapes are my favorite alt-rock band.
Not to be confused with the Grapes of Wrath, which is a classic piece of American literature.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, wait, yeah, you got another one from him. He says, "I'm so overfilled with joy." Oh, I did. Apparently, you and I need to do crossovers a little more often. We just make people burst at the seams with happiness.
Like grapes.
Yes, like grapes.
There you go.
Anyway.
Full circle.
Anyway, so, as I was saying, this somewhat impromptu stream was actually your idea. So, take it away.
100%, sure. Basically just found a video pop up in my recommendations at one point a few days ago. By this point, it's actually last week, which was basically a video about why the Heisei Gamera trilogy is not as good as people think it is, pointing out a bunch of flaws. And I watched it from start to finish. I find
regretted.
Yeah, it's a Well, you're gonna find out what's going on, but there's a reason we've decided to do a sort of point by point rebuttal of things. And to
Yep.
make clear, we're just looking at the points themselves being made. We're not going after the person who made this. We don't
No.
know we don't know the person who made this. I mean, we know the channel. We've never actually interacted with the guy as far as any of us know. But he could be a very good person, of course. We don't
It
mean
could be a fine, upstanding citizen.
yeah. Yeah, we don't mean anything towards him. We just think that the logic he's using in this particular video to say why the Gamera trilogy is not good doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And we're going to prove that by scrutinizing it and showing how it doesn't hold up. At least we're going to try. So
Yes, for sure. For sure.
and
Oh,
we are
sorry.
indeed Gamera fans. We love the Heisei Gamera trilogy, right?
Yes,
It's
yes, we do.
and we're
Yeah,
not disagreeing because we're fans, just because we're fans at
yeah,
least.
yeah.
I mean,
But just
obviously we do, but
yeah, just to give a little bit of background for any uninitiated that we have in here.
mm,
We're talking about Gamera, who is a giant turtle for all intents and purposes, was created back in the 60s as a competitor to Toho's Godzilla films by Daiei Studios. They made a handful of movies that are notorious for not being nearly as good as Godzilla and having obnoxious child characters that, thanks to MST3K, everyone affectionately calls Kenny's. There's a bit of a story behind that, but that's neither here nor there. So they
they're
made
also they're also infamous for being some of the most violent children's movies ever made.
yes, that as well. So there were eight films produced by Daiei up until 1980, and then it went away after just for one thing,
Mhm.
they made the eighth movie after an extremely long hiatus, and then the movie they made was pretty terrible, infamously bad,
Makes Godzilla's Revenge look like Hamlet.
basically.
The other
So,
movies, they have a certain campy charm to them. We're not saying that they're unwatchable, but just looking at it from any technical standpoint, they're not going to quite measure up to the Godzilla movies. They're
no,
still fun, but
yeah. Yeah. So then the mid 90s roll around and Daiei decides that they're going to revive the Gamera series with the Heisei Godzilla series going on with Toho, and they bring on there's a whole series of things that ended up happening. If you want to learn more about it, go listen to my MIFV episodes on the Gamera trilogy. I don't remember the episode numbers offhand. It's around the like late 40s, early 50s episode numbers. But they bring him in and he goes in a radical new direction compared to what we had seen before. It proved to be the first one,
Him
Guardian of the Universe.
him being Shusuke Kaneko, I don't think he
Yeah,
actually said his
Shusuke.
name.
I'm sorry about that. I forgot to mention it. Thank you. But anyway, so he comes in, he makes Gamera Guardian of the Universe, as it's called stateside. It becomes a reasonable hit. I've learned that actually the box office for these was modest, but it was a critical darling. In fact, Guardian of the Universe was named by, I think it was Kinaba Shunpo, I think is its name, which is basically the premier movie magazine in Japan, named it one of the best Japanese films of 1995. And then it spawned two sequels in 97 and 99. And I would argue that each of those, this is one of the rare times where I think each movie gets progressively better. Some do disagree on that because it's interesting when you talk to people. You can, I feel like you can learn a lot about people when you find out which entry in this trilogy they like most,
Mm,
which is kind of interesting. But all of that to say, all three of these films, particularly, I hear more people talk, especially about the first one and especially the third, as basically being peak kaiju cinema. And for me personally, and people who don't necessarily like kaiju, they enjoy these movies. These
mm.
things have a pedigree and a reputation. People have been talking about them for years. I've heard stories about people who just like fantasy films who enjoy these movies because that's just the caliber of them, unless you talk to the guy we're about to whose video we're about to deconstruct, basically. Because he is one of the few detractors. And I'm going to reserve, any final thoughts on why I think that is until later. We need to actually get into the video itself. And I do want to preface this by saying, please don't go pick on this guy and and troll him. I don't want people to do that just because we're here picking this thing apart. If you, I will admit, I'm a little surprised he hasn't been getting roasted more in the comments of his video, but there is a little bit of pushback, just not as much as I would expect. But anyway, with that, I think we've covered our bases. What do you think, Ryan?
Sounds good to me. Although
All right.
the second movie was released in 96.
96? Wait.
Late 96.
Oh, is it 96? Okay, it was 96.
It said in 97 if you pay attention to the newspapers, but
right. Okay, that might be what I'm thinking. Okay, so it was 96. And then the last
95,
one was 99.
96, and 99.
Thank you for that correction. You're even better than Jimmy. Only my podcast listeners get that joke. Anyway, so we will get started on here. So we're going to go through the video. And I will be pausing it at certain points so we can address stuff in the video. Omni, feel free to, if you have something that you want to say, just say pause and I can hit the pause button for you. Okay.
That I shall.
All right. Cause I'm running the show here. So here we go.
Considered some of the best kaiju films, the Heisei Gamera films have been highly praised by multiple people over the years, with statements such as, when a turtle was better than Godzilla.
Okay, I want to first point out that he shows some screenshots here of videos that praise this trilogy, and I would like to point out that in this one, he shows the thumbnail and the name of the channel. That will come into play again later on toward the end of the video.
And how Gamera beat Godzilla at his own game. Years ago, I believed this, until I actually bought the films and watched them. And let's just say I don't hold those opinions anymore.
All right, this is a bizarre thesis statement here to me. Because he is saying that he heard all these people, including the likes of popular YouTube channels like Accented Cinema and Up From the Depths, which you and I have a bit of a vested interest in, Ryan, because we have podcasted with Brandon, who runs the Up From the Depths channel. Go listen to episode, I think it's 37 of MIFV. It's on Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019. Yes, shameless self-promotion. I find it strange that he highlights them and he says, all of these people have said that these movies are amazing. And I believe that until I bought the movies and watched them. What?
Yeah.
Okay. Just as a personal example, I heard for years, I had seen Guardian of the Universe when I was younger. Okay. When ADV had released it, but I didn't get to movies 2 or 3 until years later. But I remember reading about people just gushing over Gamera 3, saying that it is infinitely better than any of the Godzilla movies and blah, blah, blah. Like they were hyping it like crazy. And I never went so far as to say, well, obviously that must mean that they are peak kaiju cinema. No, I would just say people say they're peak kaiju cinema. I haven't seen them yet, but I should.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Citizen Kane argument, right? Everyone says that Citizen Kane is the greatest movie ever made, or at least they did. But then a few years ago, they said it was Vertigo, and that's a whole other thing. But like, it's something that clearly people believe, but you can't really say for certain how good it is unless you actually see it. And even then, you might not actually understand right away why it's considered as good as it is, because, some of the stuff that it pioneered in terms of cinematography and storytelling and stuff is stuff that's now considered pretty commonplace today. Some of it, I should say. But back then, it was kind of revolutionary. So, sometimes it does take a little bit more than just watching the movie to say, oh, now I see what it is. But to just believe it sight unseen, that is weird.
And the other thing
which is what it sounds like he's saying. I mean, whether or not he means it, but that's what it sounds like.
Right. And it also strikes me as a little bit bizarre that he is singling out without naming them. He just shows screenshots. He is basically name dropping Up From the Depths and Accented Cinema. Well, two much larger YouTube channels in terms of subscriber count. So this is basically a small-time guy because he has about 9,200, we'll say. I'm rounding with it, about 9,200 subscribers. Both of those channels are far larger than him. So it just seems strange that this little guy's trying to punch up at the bigger guys to me. Now, I would probably feel worse if it was a bigger channel beating up on a smaller channel. That's a little unfair, but it just seems a little strange that somebody who clearly not as popular just seems to think that he knows better.
Well,
but we'll find out.
Yeah.
But like I said, his thesis is just bizarre to me. All right, here we go.
Today I'm going to go into some of the flaws I see in these films, as well as certain problems I have with the series. Starting things off is the progression of these films. In Guardian of the Universe, the story seems...
Now, that initial thing he says, where he just says he's going to talk about the flaws in his own personal issues, that in and of itself isn't necessarily that bad of a thing. We just want to make it clear. But as we get into it, you'll see why we're responding to it. So
right. Yeah, because one of the issues that I think people run into is they conflate their own personal taste with quality. Because I'm going to be honest with you, like if I was to look at the AFI list of the so-called greatest movies ever made, or look up a list of greatest novels ever written or something like that, I'm going to come across stuff in there that I'm going to be like, you know what? I don't need to see or read that. I have no interest.
I mean, even for my own part, like at one point when I was taking some local college courses, I was assigned to read The Book Thief. And I ultimately had the experience of thinking, I know this is a good story, but I really don't like the way it's written. So, but that's on me, perhaps. Or similar with Moby Dick, let's say. Moby Dick is one of those books that even people who like it will admit it can be a challenge to read. So, but you also know, even if you're having a hard time with it, somewhere in the back of your mind, you still know technically it's a good story. So.
Yeah. And just a quick acknowledgement here in the chat. We have our friend Neil Reeby, who's also a writer, watching along with us. And he has a little bit, he's got a little factoid for us based on something we said. He said part of the reason why the box office was modest for Shusuke's movies was that it did not play in as many theaters as Toho's Godzilla and Mothra movies.
Although they still made back their budgets, and then
they did, which we will get into. So here we go. So now he's talking about the progression of these movies.
Yeah, might want to back up just
a smidge.
Might want to back up just a smidge because I did talk over a little part of it.
All right, here we go.
It's the progression of these films. In Guardian of the Universe, the story seems to be everywhere. Certain characters are shown in one place, but the next time you see them, they are somewhere completely different.
That's called a scene break, sir.
Yeah, and the way he did it just there. Are you starting to see why we're responding? He's not even showing two scenes that take place one after the other. He's juxtaposing scenes from very different parts of the movie to make it seem like it jumped from this character is inside a building just talking with others somewhere, and suddenly she's running on a bridge.
Yeah,
that's not exactly.
Yeah, that's not what that's a bad faith argument, right? Well, not bad faith. That is a misrepresentation right there, because that's not what happens. That's not what happens at all. And there's also something to be said about what was my thought here? Because there's a scene break and basically he's trying to make it sound like they do something completely different in the next scene, it completely discounting whether or not there was actual setup for what happens next.
Kind of like he's trying to set it up like the movie jumps around randomly.
Yeah, which it does not do. It most certainly does not do.
Without any explanation. This is also done in Gamera Attack of Legion, with the film going from one thing to another without any context.
What is he even talking about here? Because I can follow Gamera 2 very easily. In fact, I would say out of the three, this one has the simplest story.
Yeah. And for a long
It
time,
has
Gamera
it
2
has
was
the
considered best.
it arguably has the largest cast, but it has the simplest story.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it follows you can say that it takes a bunch of different elements from pre-existing things, maybe something like H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space, that one episode of Ultra Q about the giant flower, stuff like that. But, it puts it together in a way that's very easy to follow. You can tell when a certain part of the story is supposed to end and a new part is supposed to begin. I'm really, yeah, I don't understand what he's talking about either. And I'm not really sure he explains why he thinks that. He just says it.
Yeah. Anyway.
One such example is the military fighting the Legion crabs. Right as they are about to fire upon the monster, it cuts to something else.
This is the Godzilla 2014 argument here.
Yeah. And I don't think
they're about to shoot the monsters and they cut away. Have you not heard of suspense? Maybe that is just, if I remember correctly, that was just to establish what's going on, because none of those soldiers are characters that we're following.
Yeah. We're meant to see that something is happening in one location, and then we're supposed to see what's happening basically at the same time. The cut he shows the soldiers getting ready to shoot the Legion underground, and we see above ground other soldiers are evacuating the civilians. That is a legitimate form of visual storytelling right there.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I don't see anything objectively wrong with it. I don't see anything objectively wrong with it.
No.
This is done multiple times in the film, and speaks volume to how much this film's story is all over the place.
Okay. He says, I did not edit this. This is what the actual film does for this scene. I know what he's talking about. It's a little bit of a strange choice, but it's not objectively bad.
Yeah, the parts where they do the freeze frame showing. Yeah, it's like you said, weird choice, but it was an intentional choice. Mm-hmm. It's like you don't necessarily. I'm not exactly sure what went into that choice per se, but I can look at it and not be taken out of the movie by seeing it. You can almost maybe it was supposed to be like they were, instead of showing everything happening in motion, it was like they were trying to capture the specific moments, almost like these could be photos you see in a newspaper of the aftermath or something. That's just off the top of my head, but
yeah.
That's at least a possible way to interpret it. You don't necessarily have to look at it and say, well, it's bad because it just looks weird. If you can figure out a way to at least explain it, it's just another weird one.
Well, here's the other thing, though, that I just realized looking at this. Mm-hmm. He presents this sequence on here and doesn't give an explanation for it.
Yeah.
He doesn't explain. It's like, it does this weird thing where it does this weird freeze frame thing. There's no explanation for it. He just says, the movie does weird or bad edits. And then he obscures his so-called evidence by putting text in front of it. So he gives no context and then obscures his evidence.
Yeah. At least put the text on the bottom.
Yeah. Something. So, but the most important thing is actually providing context, because he never says, it does this weird freeze frame.
Yeah.
He just
makes not the last time that'll happen.
Yeah. He just makes bizarre claim. Well, not bizarre. He just makes general claims about how it jumps around, but this has nothing to do with jumping. Well, I guess it kind of has something to do with jumping around, but it really goes back to editing. What he's actually talking about is editing.
Yeah. And the thing is, we know what's going on. Well, this scene is that the soldiers have come underground to see what happened. They see survivors and they go to evacuate the survivors. These freeze frames show them evacuating the survivors. it's easy to follow again.
Yeah. Anyway,
Gamera 3 does not have this problem as bad, as its progression is done well enough to know what is going on in the film.
I still can't get over the fact that he doesn't understand what's going on in the first 2 movies.
Yeah.
Anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there.
The next flaw has to do with illogical decisions made by the characters in these films. In Guardian of the Universe, Yoshinara, a marine officer, decides to follow around the main characters as an observer, due to a problem that happened on his ship. He barely has any motivation for literally following everyone around, except for the film to have a familiar character whenever they need someone to say a random comment about Gamera.
All right. This guy was on a military vessel, witnessed bizarre happenings that were connected to kaiju, finds out that there are people who may know what's going on, including a girl, a teenage girl. So an unlikely source. So a teenage girl who may have some sort of connection and be able to offer him explanation. So why, again, would he not tag along?
Plus, there is the other woman who's present that's also an expert. It's implied that he is partly at least tagging along because of her.
Uh-huh. So I don't know what he's getting at with this. So he gets it. So he's following them around because they might be able to shed light on this mystery he's trying to unravel. And then I would assume he also gets a little bit personally invested because they go on a bunch of escapades together.
Yeah, he gets personally involved with some of these people.
Yeah, this seems pretty easy to figure out when you've got a weird problem and there are people who might be able to offer explanation on it, even if they're a little bit weird too, because, hey, look, psychic girl with a Makatama bead who keeps talking about talking to monsters. We'll get to that too. He has problems with that. Yeah, I think, as crazy as it might sound, it's still a lead I would pursue.
Yeah.
This is not hard, people. So I just, whatever.
Gamera 2, Midori, for some reason, advises military leaders, despite her role in this film never being completely explained, nor is it explained what she does or who she is. At one point, they find out that the Legion's plant would explode. She says that
okay, we're going to get to something, a specific moment in the film, but he says nobody knows what exactly she does. And from what I can remember, it's been a minute since I've watched these. I do think the movie doesn't communicate as clearly as you would think it would about what exactly she does, but looking into it, to remind myself, she's a science curator at a museum.
Yeah.
And the reason she gets involved was a bit by happenstance, by chance.
Mm-hmm.
Because her car broke down and she asked a couple of soldiers to help her. And then that paved the way for her finding out what they're trying to do with Legion. And then she starts offering her services, her expertise, in science.
Yeah. And her car breaks down partly because of the events that are happening with the Legion. So it's not like it's just a random thing that happens.
Right. Now, I will say, and we should mention the name of this channel is GSTE, which I'm like, what does that even mean? And it stands for Godzilla Save the Earth. So I already feel like he just, he leads with his bias right there. But I will admit Honomi is pretty underdeveloped compared to the other protagonists that you see in the other movies. But that's also what I think is a problem with Gamera 2 in general. The characters are a little undercooked by comparison. Everything else in the movie is an improvement over the first one, but not the characters.
Although at the same time, when she no longer really needs to be there, then she's no longer there. So it's not like they keep her around just to keep her around.
Uh-huh.
She is there for as long as she needs to be, so she can fill the role that was assigned. And when that's done, I mean, she's not completely gone, but they do say, time for you to step aside because now things are going to get really dangerous. And They do that for the other characters that come in with her.
Yeah. All right.
She decides to stay there because they couldn't possibly escape in time. This makes no sense, and is proven wrong when 6 minutes go by without an explosion. They easily could have made it more than 4 miles away in that time. Something similar to this is done in Gamera Revenge of Iris.
Okay. Well, he makes another remark later about this, but he says like, well, this entertainment's going to blow up, but then even after 6 minutes, it doesn't blow up, they don't go. Are characters allowed to be wrong in stories?
Well, that's going to come up in a few minutes too.
It will, but I love how he thinks that it's an actual flaw in the script if someone says, I think this is what's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. Maybe what the character
knew.
Yeah, maybe what the character thought was going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, is meant to create a little thing called tension, suspense.
Plus, we don't actually find out right away if it's going to be true or not because Gamera intervenes at that point. Later on, we do see what actually happens, and, you could make the argument that maybe they wouldn't have been able to get away in time, but,
Yeah. You'll notice the theme, a theme with this. It's a lot of nitpicking that he either thinks accumulates into a pile that that makes these movies buckle, or they're molehills, to use the classic idiom, they're molehills that he has inflated into mountains.
The humans go to a populated train station, despite a huge monster chasing them. After they find out that it's closed, for some reason the human characters stand there for more than 1/3 of the movie, literally waiting for the monster to get there and destroy them all. Literally 20 minutes of the film is taken up by the human characters standing at the train station and talking about nonsense, while Iris walks towards them, causing some of them to die in result. This could have easily been avoided by a transportation vehicle called a car.
Oh, the snark! Oh, he thinks he's so clever with that. This could have been avoided with a transportation vehicle called a car.
And sarcasm aside, they are staying there for a reason.
Well, first off, the train station's closed because of a typhoon.
Yeah.
So they're cut off. Also, where are they going to get a car? You guys says there's a monster coming. Sure, there are probably cars around, but what are they going to do? Steal one? Well, that's going to go over well. Talk a stranger into giving them a ride? I'm pretty sure that stranger's probably going to be more concerned with other things. So just going and finding a car is not going to be the easiest thing to do, is what I'm saying.
But the main reason they're staying is because of Ayane, right?
Yeah.
Ayane is specifically staying there waiting for Iris to come to them. And obviously, they're not going to leave her alone. We have at least 2 characters there who have ulterior motives for when Iris shows up.
And they're the ones who die, by the way.
Yeah. So it's not like they're just standing there waiting for the monster to come and step on them. There is actual internal logic here.
Yeah. Also, there is something to be said. First off, he says, oh, they just stand around for 20 minutes talking about nonsense and waiting for the monster to come. Again, he's assuming that time passes in the same literal amount there.
Yeah. It can
That's
be
the thing. It could have it could have been editing. It could have been a few minutes.
Yeah, that's the thing about cinema. Sometimes the amount of time that we're told takes place isn't what takes place, and sometimes what seems like a long period is meant to be a short period. You kind of have to look at it in context to determine which is which.
And Omni, just for the sake of actually putting the specifics out there, you said there's an internal logic to this. Why they're still there? What is it?
Well, like I said, Ayane's waiting for Iris because she's got this mental link with Iris and wants to complete the bond that they've been forming by actually becoming one with it in this weird Neon Genesis Evangelion style merger.
Yes.
The third movie goes to some weird places.
It does.
You have the 2 human villains, I guess you could call them.
Antagonists.
Yeah, they are clearly
Oh.
of a nihilistic mindset of some sort. At least one of them is. He believes
Yeah.
that everything's going to be destroyed. And another one, she thinks that she can actually be the one who merges with Iris and takes down Gamera.
Yeah.
And of course, you have our protagonists who are staying there because they're trying to snap Ayane out of it, and they're not going to leave her alone. They're certainly not going to leave her with the two crazy people. So, like I said, there are reasons there. They actually are trying to get her to snap out of it so they can leave.
Yeah. Because Ayane is not the most cooperative person.
Yeah, we'll get to Ayane a little bit later.
Yeah. But we've now reached the point of this video where, I mean, I've already mentioned it during this stream. This is the part where his biases really rear their ugly heads.
A criticism of the Heisei Godzilla films is that the human characters just stand there watching the fight. Well,
Because they do.
Yeah, a lot of the time.
We'll unpack that in a second.
First thing is that the humans actually are involved in stopping the monsters in almost every Heisei Godzilla film.
I would like to point out that because I mentally went through all of the Heisei movies to see, and again, some of these I haven't watched in a while, so I could be misremembering. But first off, they're not as proactive as he remembers them, and even if they are proactive, they generally fail.
Yeah, but the most proactive you can say is that you have pilots for the robots. So Mecha King Ghidorah, Mecha Godzilla, Mogera, they're piloted by humans. So yeah, technically humans are actively involved in the fight, even if we're focused more on the external machine than we are on the people in the cockpit. But then you have something like Godzilla versus Mothra, aka Godzilla and Mothra: The Battle for Earth. I have an entire video on my channel about how the human characters in that movie are 100% useless.
Yeah.
And of course, then there's Godzilla versus Biollante. There is active military measures taken against Godzilla, but by the finale, it's all just monster against monster. Similar deal with Godzilla versus Destroya. So while he's not 100% wrong to say that the humans are involved, at the same time, there is still a lot of instances where you are just looking at the humans commenting on things. So,
and it happens consistently throughout all of them. It's to the point where it's practically a meme. Okay, our cast of characters sitting in front of a big screen TV watching things happen. Yeah, like you said, some of them are in robots, some of them are in vehicles, and sometimes they have their own little subplots going on. But he's again, like I said, he is clearly biased toward Heisei Godzilla.
Yeah,
and seems to be upset that people are saying that the Heisei Gamera movies, and by Heisei I mean like we're talking about the reigns of the emperors, because that's how the Japanese calendar works. For those who don't know, they designate periods. Like basically, the calendar resets when a new emperor ascends to the throne, and then so it wouldn't be 1989; it would be Heisei 1. So I'm just making sure you understand that. So they're calling these series, they're naming them this based on the names of the emperor. Anyway,
yeah.
So, I think it's just because people are saying, well, these movies are better, that he's taking some umbrage with this because, and maybe this is going to be a bit of a hot take for some people. I don't understand why some Godzilla fans seem to be upset by this. That they have to acknowledge the existence of other kaiju, or that other kaiju movies might have been better. Because I hate to break it to you, yeah, especially when you get to the 90s Godzilla films, Gamera wins. Just in terms of storytelling and filmmaking, Gamera wins.
I mean, and heck, Gamera had a better anime than Godzilla.
Yeah, and it's not to besmirch the people who made the Heisei Godzilla films, or the people who were in it. Looking at Yumagumi Odaka, she is a wonderful, wonderful person. Wonderful woman. Not to besmirch any of them. It's just the Gamera movies were better, and it's okay.
Yeah, It's like you can't necessarily, just because you acknowledge somebody as an Olympian athlete doesn't mean that another athlete is bad by default. You can still be a good athlete even if you're not an Olympian.
Yeah.
So that's our thought about people being bored watching commentators looking at a screen and talking about it. So what were we doing again?
I was going to say, I think we were staring at a screen.
Yeah.
Jokes. Anyway.
And the second thing is that they didn't stand in the same spot for 20 minutes.
What are you talking about? Of course they did. We just said they stared at a screen and watched monsters fight.
Yeah.
I think he even said himself, like, they think that's what they do. Yeah, it's what they do.
And heck, sometimes the robots that they're piloting don't move around a lot either. Mecha King Ghidorah didn't have a suit actor in it because the suit was too heavy. So he just stands there. He's for 20 minutes, which means his pilot is standing there for 20 minutes.
Hey, you know who else stands around for minutes at a time? Godzilla. Because, again, we all love Kenpachiro Satsuma, the late great Kenpachiro Satsuma, who wore that suit, but it was so dang heavy he could barely move. Why do you think everyone jokes now about how the Heisei Godzilla films are just glorified light shows because it's just the monsters shooting at each other from long distances? It was hard to get into actual grappling and fisticuffs in those suits.
Yeah, which means it's impressive when they do, but still, there were sacrifices made.
Yeah, anyway.
About philosophy, while a monster is right there waiting to destroy them. Something else in Gamera Guardian of the Universe is that the humans don't ask questions about the monsters or their actions. They don't wonder how these monsters can shoot lasers or fire and try to use this against them. Unlike the Heisei Godzilla films.
Why is this a problem?
And furthermore, yes, they do ask questions. There are a lot of questions asked. And we do actually get an answer, maybe not necessarily a highly detailed answer. The reason that we're dealing with flying turtle monsters that can spit fireballs and weird bat lizard creatures that are only one sex and are hypervores is because they're bioengineered creatures from Atlantis. There's your answer. I mean, it's not necessarily going into all the nitty-gritty of it, but that is the answer. They ask the questions, those are the answers.
And with Legion, they're like, oh, it's an alien organism.
Yeah, there's an alien dissection scene in that movie.
Yeah,
and that one we know is fake.
Yeah, which right there. I mean, yes, it's a very quick shorthand, but it at least tells you the reason why this thing is weird is because it's not from this planet, so we don't know how it works.
And
it's okay to not know how something works.
Yeah, and the information they gain isn't necessarily going to be that useful. Like, they determine the Legion are filled with pressurized gas, basically. It's like, okay, cool. How can we actually use that against them, like you're suggesting? You can punch a hole in them, but how are you going to manage to do that without getting overrun? Like, and yeah, that's part of the issue here.
Yeah, and we're about to get to his evidence for why this is a problem. I have opinions. Anyway.
Or even the Showa Godzilla films, like an example being Terror of Mechagodzilla. After finding out Titanosaurus is sensitive to certain frequencies, they use this to their advantage, compared to Guardian of the Universe, where the humans completely forget about it and move on with the story. This is done multiple times, with Gamera shooting fire, digging underground, and literally flying, as well as there being no question on how Giles can shoot a light beam that produces sound waves powerful enough to have an effect on physical objects. The most the humans give...
Okay. I'm glad that we're on the same wavelength there. He just said his argument. Okay, this is his argument. His argument is that these monsters do really weird things and nobody thinks it's strange or asks questions about it, which we have just said is objectively not true.
Mm-hmm.
And his counter argument is to say, when the humans figured out that this monster in a Godzilla movie had a weakness, they used it to their advantage.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing.
No.
That was probably the most baffling part of this entire video when I saw it, because I'm like, that's not even the same thing.
Yeah, the finding out a weakness, cool, but like then he's talking about the powers of the monsters. Gao's shooting lasers, Gamera flying and shooting fireballs, those are not weaknesses. Like Titanosaurus being sensitive to radio wave sonar effects. It is not even apples and oranges. It's apples and Newton's cradles.
Yeah. And I should point out that if we want to actually if we want to take his example, ignore the fact that he's using the wrong evidence, the wrong example for this point. Okay, he says they figured out Titanosaurus was weak to supersonic waves and they used it to their advantage. They do that in the first two Gamera movies. In these first two Gamera movies, at least they attempt to. They're like, we need to do something to counter the supersonic beam that Gauss does. Let's see if we can do that. Doesn't work, but they do. They're like, let's see if we can try to do this. Like, what was it? Like, was it the cage in the baseball stadium?
Well, they don't know they can shoot lasers at that point.
No, they don't have. No, they can shoot, but they were like, let's see if we can use this.
Yeah, they're trying to capture them at that point. They're like, okay, how do you capture a large flying thing? That's how we can do it. And they're sensitive to light. That's going to come up again in a moment.
Yeah.
So using the lights to herd them in, that's how they get it to work. And then Gamera shows up,
and they're always right. And then with Legion, they're like, what is this thing made of? How do we deal with this? And then the problem just continues to escalate.
And they do actually find out that they are attracted to certain items, certain wavelengths and stuff, and they use that to affect against the smaller ones. So they actually do exactly what he said they don't do.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't come up as much in Iris because Iris is an incredibly weird monster that is presented as basically a Final Fantasy boss, and no one knows what to do with it. It's just that powerful. And it's a very different kind of story where we don't have a bunch of scientists trying to advise the military on what to do. It's a more personal story by comparison, especially to Gamera 2, where they're trying to help.
And the military is not concerned with Iris anyway, because they don't even know Iris is a thing. They're concerned about Gamera at that point.
Yeah. And so the closer we get to it is our protagonists think Ayane is our key to dealing with Iris. So that's as close as they get to figuring out a weakness. But regardless, they do exactly what they did in Terror of Mechagodzilla.
The third movie does have the gag about how there is that weird knife that's supposed to deal with Iris. And even as it keeps getting bigger and bigger, that one kid is still carrying it around like, it's got to do something, right? Which, it ultimately does, but not the way you'd expect.
Yes, so. Exactly. All right, back to the video.
Give is a surprised face. Then after the dust...
That's not true. Okay, the characters are not just doing surprised faces. Please stop.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Settles, they act like it's just an average Tuesday.
Well, I could make the joke that this is Japan. So...
I mean, even in the wake of something like that, there is still a human desire to have a bit of normalcy in your life. So...
Yeah, I mean... say what you... I know you have strong opinions about Shin Godzilla, Omni, but I did think it was telling how in Shin Godzilla we have the first big Godzilla attack, lots of destruction in it, and the gag, part of the satire of the movie is that all that crazy stuff happens, and then everyone just goes back to normal for a little while. And then Godzilla shows back up and is like, hey, remember me?
Yep. I'll at least give it that much, I guess.
It's human nature.
And we do see in the first Gamera movie that there do wind up being long-term consequences. As they're gearing up for the final battle with Gauss nesting in the remains of Tokyo Tower, there is that scene where we have the news report and they're saying like the value of the yen is plummeting, the economy is crashing, people are being displaced, and we don't know where they're going. So they are addressing that there are consequences going on here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This makes zero sense, especially with the main character being a scientist. Which leads to my next point. The bird scientist in Gamera Guardian of the Universe is incredibly confusing. She makes statements about Giles that are either proven untrue, or sometimes instantly contradicted, such as her claim about Giles being nocturnal, only for Giles to literally show up during the day.
I don't know if I should pause it now or wait for him to finish this point, and then we could just address each one.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
5 seconds after she says this. And the same thing goes for her claim about Giles having a weakness to light, just because she flashed a camera lens in its face. This is proven completely false when Giles literally builds a nest on the tallest thing in the area, and fights Gamera with zero problems during the daytime. These claims, although proven false, were never talked about again, making it very confusing for the audience. The next flaw, I think.
Now we can pause.
Yes.
So first of all, when the gal shows up at right after she says maybe it's nocturnal, I'm pretty sure it's dusk at that point. So the sun is setting, night is coming. They're getting out to feed after not being seen all day. That does point to the idea of them being nocturnal.
Yeah. My reply to it would be like, it's meant to be suspenseful and a bit funny. And 2, what I said before, characters are allowed to be wrong.
Yeah, he actually includes the subtitles in a lot of these shots. She says, maybe it's nocturnal. So she's theorizing. She doesn't necessarily think it is definitive. And later on, we do see that the gals are sensitive to bright light. I mean, it's clear. They use it to herd them in. The cameras are flashing. That hurts their eyes. And as far as the larger gals at the end having the ability to be out in the day, we see clearly it's developed shields over its eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be out in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It should also be, I would also point out, okay, let's see what happens when someone shines a really bright light in your face. See how you respond to that. It's a flash bulb. There's a difference between flash bulbs, which are quick flashes of incredibly powerful light getting shined right into your face. Because the problem is the eyes. This is not like a vampire, where the idea is that they can't be in the light at all, generally speaking, because they're incredibly sensitive to the light.
They'll sparkle. No, wait, those aren't vampires.
Oh, wait, yeah, excuse me. But but like I said, you flash a light in anybody's face, they're not going to take well to it.
Yeah.
It's different than being out in the sunlight.
Yeah, or shine a very bright light in their eyes.
Yeah.
Just not even just a strobing effect, just a very powerful spotlight shined right at you. You're going to want to avoid that. Even if you're not strictly nocturnal, it still works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But just because they come out at night, they're nocturnal, doesn't mean they can't stand the daylight. Like I said, they're not vampires.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's the shields over the eyes. So
right.
The answers are all in there.
Yeah.
I think personally makes these films unwatchable for me.
Oh, this is the one where we get to the points that make them unwatchable. Like, I'm sorry. If you just want to say you don't like it or you don't think they're that good, sure. He's now saying that not only are they overrated, they are unwatchable.
We'll see.
Unwatchable. My gosh. This better be like MST3K levels of bad, sir.
We're talking Ed Wood collaborating with Tommy Wiseau.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I just made you not
this is like Tommy Wiseau making a movie for the Asylum or collaborating with Neil Breen. Like, it better be that level of bad. Just saying.
In order to understand the story, it requires the audience to assume a lot, partly due to my previous points about things having no explanation, like in Gamera 3. One of my main
First off, I would like to point out that if you want everything in a fantasy or science fiction story, every little detail to be explained to you, it's going to get very boring very fast.
Mm-hmm. Even hard science fiction leaves some things up to the imagination.
Yeah. Also, even in real life, like you go, I don't know, you go visit a town you've never been to before, and there's some weird little thing that people say or do in this town that makes it a little bit different. You ask them, well, why do you do that? You're inviting an entire history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
When all you wanted was a simple explanation for why that happens. I'm just saying, there are reasons why, and I know. Welcome to my channel, because I talk about things like Tolkien and kaiju in the same breath. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings. A lot of the world building details are in the back in the appendices.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there is stuff in that happens over the course of the story, and not all of them are explained. If you want all those details, you go to the back.
Yep. And of course, as mentioned, there are explanations in these movies.
Yeah. Anyway, next.
Main problems with Gamera 3 is the human story. At first, Ayana's family is introduced.
Okay, I do want to preface this by saying I have heard some criticism of the we'll say the human story in Gamera 3, and I'm not saying that it's completely unfounded, but this guy goes into a completely different place that I don't really hear people talk about as much.
With it looking like the film will be focusing on their relationship, but
Oh,
suddenly without explanation, things having no
a little bit,
explanation, like in Gamera 3. One of my main problems with Gamera 3 is the human story. At first, Ayana's family is introduced, with it looking like the film will be focusing on their relationship. But suddenly, without explanation in the film, Ayana's adopted family is killed by Iris. This is only shown through a short flashback at the end of the film, but isn't brought up anywhere in the actual film by any of the characters. And instead of the family relationship being built on, this is instead replaced with Ayana staring at nothing, while other characters talk about random stuff.
Okay, so first of all, it is addressed in before the flashbacks at the end, because there's a scene where they find the bodies. That's how we learn they're dead. But where do we even begin with breaking down the rest of it?
Yeah, you want to know why Ayane, even after that happens, why she's just like cold and emotionless for most of the rest of the movie? It's called emotional damage.
Sometimes it's
That's
called
the point.
PTSD.
You ever try dealing with somebody who's been emotionally traumatized? They tend to shut down.
Yeah. Grief manifests in different ways. Sometimes it manifests with the person basically closing themselves off from everything. And that's kind of the point. Like, they established that's the relationship she has with those family members. And once that's established, I mean, she's clearly not going to grow beyond that just spontaneously. And as far as Iris killing everyone, that plays into the greater idea that what Ayane wants is revenge against Gamera. Iris is the embodiment of her revenge, but this is one of those stories where it's about how revenge is not only a futile task, it can also cause just as much harm to the people you didn't want to hurt as it does the things or people you do want to hurt.
Yeah, and
So
the point
it's an
of
anti-revenge story.
Yeah, and the point of sorry, I interrupted you there.
It's okay.
Yeah, and the point of not showing it until the end, but he doesn't provide context for that. He just makes it sound like, oh, you never see it, nobody talks about it, and then they just throw at the ends like, oh, Iris killed her adopted family. First off, we've established that's not exactly what happens, but the reason we don't see it until then is because that flashback is being experienced by a young when she's coming to her senses and realizing that she's been doing the wrong thing this entire time. And it wasn't just her family, it was a bunch of strangers who she didn't even know, because she's seeing through Iris's eyes the deaths of every single person that Iris has killed.
That she had no idea about. Which
she had no idea
he's
about.
About to say. I mean, we didn't quite get to the point where he says she just spontaneously changes her mind, but he's about to say she just spontaneously changes her mind. When in fact, she's just learning about it. And appropriately, she's appalled.
Yeah. So we're experiencing it with her. But we already know that they are dead. The other characters find out about it.
Yeah.
Why did we need to see it? If we had seen it then, and then had no follow-up with it, or we saw it twice, it would have lessened the impact the second time. Anyway.
Yeah, because we see the aftermath of what happened when they're finding these bodies that look like bog mummies, basically, but we don't actually see what happened until that flashback. And even if it's not necessarily a mystery what happened, we can kind of assume Iris did it. There's still something to be said for seeing the monster's point of view as it's attacking these people and seeing their fear and their terror. And Ayane realizes that Ayane just can't look away from it. That really is where the impact is.
Right.
And of course, it's appropriate that she is seeing it through Iris's eyes, not just because she's sharing a memory, but because, technically speaking, that's what she wanted Iris to do. She wanted Iris to get rid of the people that she felt were adding to her trauma and causing her trauma. That wound up being far greater than she initially thought, with just, it's the turtle's fault. And when she realizes that, that is the turning point.
Right. By the way, I kind of want to apologize a little bit that I keep pausing it. Funny enough, on this smug looking avatar that this guy has. Anyway, moving on.
The thing's not explained well, or not at all, is the necklace, which somehow has a connection between Gamera and Asagi. But again, this is not explained or built upon in the films. And the main character for Gamera 1 and 3 don't make up for the problems in these films.
Okay, the beat. I love how he just casually brings this up. Okay. All right. First off, there are enough details given about this bead's significance. Gamera was created by ancient Atlantis. This is part of the lore of the movie, and was created to stop the Gauss, and the beads connect a priestess to Gamera to allow the priestess to be the liaison from the Atlanteans and then later humanity to Gamera.
Exactly.
That's enough of an explanation right there if you're looking at it purely as a fantasy story. What he is failing to realize, and he'll bring this up again later with some similar things, is he clearly doesn't understand the cultural aspects of it, because it's a Magatama bead. Magatama beads are part of Shinto. If I remember correctly, it's Shintoism over there, and they have it's used in Okinawa. I think it's Okinawa. I think it's what it is. Yeah, they're used by in Okinawan religion. But these are things that are just inherently understood. They're common knowledge for the original audience, which is the Japanese. So they don't require much explanation.
It's like a cross necklace in the West.
Right. Exactly. So it doesn't need a lot of explaining. It just, people just know, oh, that has spiritual significance. And it's being used in this way. Gotcha.
Yeah. But again, like, even if you're not necessarily that familiar with these beads before, if you never even knew Magatama beads existed before you saw these movies, you can still understand how they're meant to function within the context of these movies.
Right. Because magic amulets being used by characters to talk to monsters or other things is not that weird.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly common trope. Sorry, guys.
With Asagi being introduced as a lively character that adds a lot to the story. But after she has a connection to Gamera, she becomes lifeless and has nothing to give to the story. The same thing.
Oh, I'm going to tattle on Miss Ayako Fujitani on you, sir. I hope you don't come to G-Fest. She's going to be at G-Fest this year. Are you going to actually go up to her and say, I would like you to know that you give a lifeless performance? Wow.
Your comic book guy is very interesting. Worst Gamera movie ever.
Worst Gamera video ever.
But yeah, like here, I think he's missing what's going on. She's become Gamera's priestess, and that means she has a giant monster in her head. A non-human intelligence is now taking up residency in her mind. That's going to have an effect, and she's becoming more somber as she's forming that connection. That's why her character changes.
It should also be noted that she's also feeling the burden of it, because at first she's just a mostly carefree teenage girl, and then suddenly she has the weight of the world thrust upon her.
Yeah, anyone would be pretty somber after that.
Yeah, and to be honest, she had to grow up a little bit.
Plus, she appears in the rest of the movies, and she's not necessarily back to being bubbly, carefree, and everything, but she's not just deadpan for the rest of them. She has grown up, of course. She had to grow up very quickly, and that doesn't just go away with the sequels, nor should it, because that's how character progression works. But it's not like that. He only mentions her performance in that movie. He doesn't mention the fact that when she comes back, she's not just continuing to be deadpan like that. Not that her deadpan stuff was even bad. That was appropriate for what was going on. In fact, it actually makes it makes the delivery of her line, "He's here," right before Gamera bursts out of the ground, all the more impactful. I don't think it would have been nearly as good as if she had been over the top going, "He's here, he's here." There's just sort of this subtle, like the whole world is shaking, and then she just says, "Kita," in original Japanese, and then boom, Gamera's out of the ground. It's like that momentary bit of almost silence, I guess you could say, right before the catastrophe.
Or like, even if it was like the girl from Poltergeist.
Yeah.
Where she say, "He's here." It doesn't work. It works in Poltergeist. It doesn't work here.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked there. That was just bizarre to me. It was just bizarre. I don't understand why some people think that if someone is giving a deadpan performance, it automatically means bad acting.
Yeah, deadpan performances are actually not easy to do. Like sometimes I'll see fan animations of something where a person is giving a performance as a deadpan character who is deadpan in the original work, and it doesn't quite sound right because they think all they need to do is just be monotone. But that's not it. You have to be monotone in a very particular way.
Yeah.
It is difficult work.
Yeah, and even something, and I know this is going to be a really strange example, but it astonishes me in another regard. People think that, like, when Schwarzenegger was in the original Terminator, we'll talk about that one specifically. And people think, Schwarzenegger had to play the robot because he's not that great of an actor. Actually, if you look at what Schwarzenegger does in that movie, it's full of a lot of subtle nuances. Even though, he's playing an unemotional, single-minded killing machine, literally killing machine.
Yeah,
but he's still putting subtleties into that performance, which is what makes him terrifying.
Yeah, like when he's in the police station and he right before he says that iconic line, "I'll be back," he just is standing there, and even though he's got the sunglasses on so you can't even see his eyes, he starts just looking around. It's like you could, if you were to be hyperbolic, you could say he's just moving his head around, but no, he's scanning. He is looking at the structural integrity of the surroundings, and his computer mind is forming a plan based on that.
Yes. In
Or
fact,
you can,
Schwarzenegger came up, I saw this in an interview. He actually said he came up with this idea and he gave it to Cameron, and Cameron thought it was brilliant, where he said that when the Terminator moves his head, the eyes move first. And then it's like this, it's just like subtly everything else goes. Like the eyes move, and then when they can't move anymore, the head moves. And when the head can't move anymore, the shoulders and the body move. Because it's like a surveillance camera. It goes as far as it can, and then it goes back.
Yeah. And it's very robotic the way he does it. Again, very difficult to do. Or if you want another good example, Leonard Nimoy as Spock. He's literally supposed to be from an emotionless race. At least half of him is. And yet, again, you can hear all kinds of subtleties in his performance where even as he is being quote unquote emotionless, you can still hear that little sarcasm in there, or that bit of bemusement, or all these other little things that let you know he's not just standing there reciting his lines in a monotone voice. He is acting.
Which is something that, unfortunately, a lot of people who've tried to play Vulcans don't always grasp.
Yeah.
They don't understand that you're not just supposed to be like this all the time. That just makes you sound like what's the robot's name from Hitchhiker's Guide? Marvin. That just makes you sound like Marvin. All right.
Yeah. And not a good version of Marvin.
Yeah. That just makes you sound like Marvin. No, there's ways to infuse that. That's why I honestly, that just shows how good of an actor Leonard Nimoy is, and why you need exceptionally good actors to play characters like Spock or just another Vulcan. Because that's the potential danger you run into, is that you make the characters intentionally boring when that's shouldn't be the case. But anyway, we belabored that point enough.
Goes for Ayanna in Gamera Revenge of Iris. Most of her screen time is made up of her having a blank expression, and her character isn't even well written. With her wanting
Sir.
Revenge for Gamera accidentally destroying her family, but at the same time, she doesn't bat an eye when Iris kills individual people, including her adopted family. And then suddenly at the end of the film,
emotional damage!
And she doesn't know that Iris is killing people. She is not privy to that knowledge, as we established, until the very end, which makes what he's about to say even more frustrating. Go ahead.
She changes her mind, which leads to Gamera's character. Gamera is made out to be the protector of...
She doesn't change until the end. Yeah, that's called a character arc.
Yeah, and she doesn't change until the end because, again, that's when she learns. And it's not that she's changing her mind. She's not just like, oh, killing people is actually bad, isn't it? I guess I'm not for that anymore. No, it's like, wait, Iris, did you kill? No, did I kill? Oh, no. She's having this sudden realization of what her anger, what her pent-up rage has wrought upon the world. I mean, if that's just changing your mind, then
oh my gosh! And now we're getting to his analysis of Gamera, and this is my gosh! I want to preface this by saying one of the most genius things about this trilogy is even the freaking monster gets a character arc, and you're about to hear him say, "It's stupid." Anyway,
from Earth. But at the same time, he's causing its destruction. Due to his absorption of something called mana.
What is it? How does she know any of this? Is he talking about Asagi?
I think so. I think he's asking how she knows about all of this mana stuff.
She was connected. She actually, at this point, she still is. She's connected to Gamera. You're telling me she wouldn't pick up on some of this stuff?
And she's been researching Gamera as well. She's been researching anything that's happened. So all of the characters who come back in the third movie have been, well, maybe not
No,
so
this
much.
this is movie 2, I think.
No, this is the third one.
Oh, it is it? Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, but obviously, everybody's favorite screaming man doesn't necessarily do research between movies. But,
What's his name again? The cop who's in all of them, and he just gets freaked
yeah.
out in every single one of them.
Fortunately, he doesn't get affected by this video. I'm actually,
Which is weird. It's kind of weird.
I mean, he's literally just there for a cameo in Attack of Legion. You'd think that would have been another thing, but anyway, that's beside the point. But the other characters, like, okay, our bird scientist, ornithologist, by the way, she wasn't an expert on Gauss in the first movie because she had never encountered them before. No one had. By the third movie, she is an expert because she's been researching them. She quite literally wrote the book on them. Same deal with Asagi. She has been Gamera's priestess, so she has more knowledge than most, and she's also been researching stuff. So, yes, that's how she would know.
Okay.
Admittedly, Mana isn't necessarily explained in the greatest detail, but then
we'll
again,
get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. Hold on.
Which again isn't well explained, nor does it make sense. But due to Gamera absorbing this mana, because of an ever-changing environment, it led to Legion coming to Japan, as well as creating more Gaios. So how does Gamera solve this problem? He absorbs more mana, which leads to more destruction of human lives and cities, creating an endless cycle getting worse as time goes on. But the film makes Gamera seem good at the end of the series, with him caring so much about the girl that he cuts off his own arm to rescue her.
Oh, we're going to get back to that.
That doesn't
we'll get back to that in a moment.
really make sense. First of all, Iris is back with Gamera.
Okay. Oh, he's getting to. Yeah. Oh, we got a thing. But let's talk about the mana. The mana issue here first. Okay. First off, like I said, Gamera goes through an arc. Mana is also a cultural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've looked into it. It's a bit of a cultural thing.
That's not the Old Testament kind.
No, that has two ends, but this is one end. And so it's a bit of a cultural thing that would just be more readily understood by the original Japanese audience. Also, he laid out the actual explanation for it right there. That is actually in the movies. Mm-hmm. And the whole point is that mana is the energy force of the earth, of nature, that lots of things can tap into.
Yeah.
And his argument his problem seems to be that by having less of it, it invites attacks from Legion and Gauss, but Gamera is literally creating the problem by absorbing it.
Yeah. It's made pretty clear that the reason that the mana started depleting was actually because of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Which, typical kaiju Ega trope. But yeah, Gamera doesn't start the cycle. He does consume mana, yes. He consumes quite a bit of it dealing with the Legion, but that's how he was designed. And he only really consumes that much at the end of Attack of Legion because he kind of had to.
Yeah, he was about to die. But this would be like someone going into, finding an oasis in a desert, and they're, well, that's not the right analogy. Basically, it would be like going someplace where there's a short supply of water, but if there's a short supply of water because the people there had already been drinking too much of it, but you need to have water, so you drink water. So they're like, well, we're going to blame you for the drought or blame you for people dying of thirst. The water was already in short supply as it was, and I needed to have some.
Mm-hmm. And Gamera only consumes the mana to any real extent when he needs to. I think Attack of Legion was actually the first time that happened. So
yeah,
he's not even...
He has this big finishing move with the mana. Before that, he's spitting plasma fireballs, which the implication seems to be those are a different thing.
Yeah, which means his claim that Gamera is responsible for bringing Legion to Earth here is, again, false. It's because humans were depleting mana first. Gamera had to deplete more mana in order to win, which, yes, okay, that didn't help the problem with the shortage of mana. It did solve the fact that there was an invasive species that had landed on the planet.
Yeah. So when
that came here because of
when your options are, deplete more of the energy that we need and potentially invite more problems later, and very immediate apocalypse.
Yeah.
That's the point. It's supposed to be a desperation move.
The second movie even ends with the characters saying they need to be better at maintaining the environment, or else other stuff will happen, maybe even Gamera turning on us. So, but anyway, let's continue.
Oh, this next one.
Else.
This next one. Oh, man. We're only halfway through this video, too. Look at us. We're an hour and 20 minutes in, and we're only halfway through this thing. Oh, my.
Meaning Gamera is able to sense where people are, even if he doesn't see them. Which also means Gamera knew what he was doing when he shot through a building full of people.
Okay, let me back it up.
On helpless by
I can get a slightly better context. Let me get slightly better context.
Now, absorbs more mana, which leads to more destruction of human lives and cities, creating an endless cycle getting worse as time goes on. But the film makes Gamera seem good at the end of the series, with him caring so much about the girl that he cuts off his own arm to rescue her. Now, if you think about that, that doesn't really make sense. First of all, Iris's back was to Gamera, meaning Gamera is able to sense where people are.
He did not get that right. When Gamera blows his own hand off at that scene, Iris is not facing away from Gamera. Iris is facing towards Gamera. For that scene where Iris is looking down at Ayane, that's after Gamera's been stabbed through the stomach and is flat on his back. So Gamera's not even in that scene. Again, he's misrepresenting the sequence of events in order to make a point that doesn't even make sense.
Okay. That's just the part of what we need to address here.
I just couldn't let that go.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't see them. Which also means Gamera knew what he was doing when he shot through a building full of people and stepped on helpless bystanders.
I need to point out that was early on in Gamera 3, not during the end, when Gamera is just at a point of not caring about collateral damage.
Yeah,
which is established in the first movie. They say, oh, he's protecting us. No, he's not protecting us. He's protecting the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
We just happen to be on it.
And any connection he did have with humanity, was implied to have been severed by the end of Gamera 2 when that Magatama bead breaks in Asagi's hand.
Which happened when he absorbed more mana, so he basically overloaded it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea here. So Gamera is just not caring at this point. Because again, he's a kaiju with a character arc. It's weird to think about that. Okay, it's a kaiju with a character arc.
And we're supposed to be a bit unsure at this point. Why is Gamera causing so much destruction like this? Has he actually turned on us, like was hinted at the end of the movie? It's a bit like Godzilla versus Kong. Why is Godzilla attacking the Florida place when he's never attacked humans before? Intentionally. He's caused destruction, of course. So it's meant to bring about that tension and get the audience intrigued. Again, legitimate form of storytelling right there.
Right.
Now, this along with Gamera being the sole reasons why monsters are created and led to Japan, makes Gamera more of a villain than Godzilla.
Wait. What was this funny little footnote
here? Now, this along with Gamera being the sole reasons why monsters are created and led to Japan.
Gamera walking through a city despite being able to fly.
What's wrong with that?
Just because he could fly through it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best idea.
Yeah, plus flying probably takes more effort than walking. Especially the way Gamera does it.
Exactly. Good Lord. Oh my gosh. These little footnotes are almost worse. I mean, you could apply that to basically everything. I mean, he later on he's actually going to say, "Well, the Showa Gamera movies were better." They did that in the Showa Gamera movies too.
Yeah, we'll get
Yeah.
because
Anyway.
flying was supposed
Makes
to be
Gamera more of
Yeah.
never
a
mind.
villain than Godzilla ever was. Now let's talk about the camera angles in these films.
Oh my
Here we go.
word. Oh my word.
These films basically use two types of angles. Extremely low angles, having something block the monsters all the time, and extremely close shots. These angles make it incredibly hard to see what is going on in the fights. While some are better than others, most of the shots make it impossible to see the fight, and have no purpose other than hide what is going on. The close-ups are very disorienting, with it being hard to see what is going on, with scenes like Gamera vs. Iris Sky Battle literally being unwatchable. These angles are done to hide the fact that there is nothing going on in the fight. The fight's mostly consisting of Gamera pushing a monster until he gets stabbed. Unlike the
We
Heisei
should
Godzilla
probably
films or
pause
even the
here.
Showa Gamera films.
Okay. Man, this is there are multiple ways to respond to this particular thought.
First off, these were creative choices made by Kaneko and Shinji Iguchi. And the big reason that they did it, especially the low angle shots, was because they wanted a grounded human perspective to make the monsters look huge. That's why things are in the way. Because if you're on the ground and you're looking up, there are going to be things in the way. There will be things that will obscure your view. Yeah.
And
was there a level of budget consciousness that came that's probably factoring into that choice? Sure, but that doesn't make it bad.
And it provides extra stuff in the foreground. Provides not only a sense of depth to the scene, but also furthers the perspective. Because if you've got something you know is big in the foreground and there's something you can see behind it, again, that leads to it looking even bigger.
Yeah, and I would like to point out, this just makes me think of a Matt Frank line, which honestly is probably the most insightful thing the man has ever said, which is that people don't want their movies to how did he put it? I try to remember exactly. They don't want them to look good. They want them to look expensive, or they don't want them to look realistic. They want them to look expensive. That's what he said. And so, yeah, there's probably a level of budget consciousness here. But here's the thing. I dare anybody to watch these Gamera movies and then watch some 90s Godzilla films, which technically had twice the budget, and tell me which one looks better.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you right now, the fact that Kaneko and Iguchi are using some camera tricks to hide some of the shortcomings of their special effects actually makes them look better.
And that plays into the close-ups as well. Like, I think the close-ups are a good example of how you have to work within certain restraints. He showed a behind-the-scenes shot. Can you actually land on it for a moment?
Yeah, give me a second here. Let me see.
Not too far behind.
Mostly consisting of Gamera
hold on.
pushing a monster until he gets stabbed.
It's before this.
With scenes like Gamera vs. Iris Sky Battle literally being unwatchable.
Almost
These angles
there.
are done to hide the fact that there is nothing going on.
Right there. Okay. Look at this scene. Where are the puppeteers in relation to the puppets? They're right on the same level, right? This isn't like at the Jim Henson Company where they're building the sets 5 to 6 feet tall so that they can hold the puppets above them and have the cameras up there and hide the puppeteers down below. The puppeteers are on the same level. So the way you're going to hide them is you have to zoom in on the monsters. And yes, that means you're getting really close, but a good cinematographer and a good director will know how to frame it and edit it and make it all come together in a way that you don't really consciously think about it. And you know, I think that's not a bad technique. You got to work with the constraints you have, and you've got to figure out how to make
Mhm.
what you've got work within those constraints. Orson
Mhm.
Welles, I think, actually said that the worst thing a filmmaker can have is a lack of constraints, because that means, like, I mean, there are many layers to that statement, but like here you clearly have certain things you got to work with in order to make the shot look good. They found a way. Shouldn't we be praising the fact that they did?
Exactly. I mean, this is not like, because this is, I there's a similar criticism that I've heard lobbed against the Jason Bourne movies, because that then started getting copied by other filmmakers. Now they mostly talk about they don't like shaky cam, and I get that, but another part of what the Jason Bourne movies did was they zoomed in really close during fight scenes, so you're not really seeing what exactly is going on, and that drew attention to itself. This Every time I watch these movies, I never think about that. And the
Yeah.
other thing that should be noted, in some cases, the reasons for the extreme close-ups is also a creative choice.
Mhm.
One that he actually shows in here is the finale of Gamera 3, which takes place in a train station. For humans, that's a big space. For the kaiju, it's close quarters. So the
Hmm.
fact that we have these tight camera angles is to make you feel claustrophobic, because the kaiju feel claustrophobic because it's a confined space for them, and also the human characters suddenly feel a little more confined because there are large creatures in the station with them now.
Yeah. And that fight remains fairly, like, you don't see many kaiju fights inside of buildings even today. So that still remains a very iconic fight scene as a result of that.
Right. It's unique.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Going on in the fight. The fight's mostly consisting of Gamera pushing a monster until he gets stabbed. Unlike the Heisei Godzilla films or even the Showa Gamera films, they don't utilize any of Gamera's powers. Literally,
Oh,
Hmm.
I want to point out that his transitions in this video are kind of terrible.
They can be.
Yeah. Now I will point out this is only the latest in what seems like this endless stream of bad faith videos being made by YouTubers who saw -1 and suddenly thought they knew everything about Godzilla. The most
Hmm.
notorious being someone named Dr. Skipper, whose video was 25 minutes long, and it's an ADHD nightmare. So this is not nearly as bad as that. And obviously this guy's a fan, so he knows
Yeah.
what he's talking about. He
When it
comes to
comes
all
to,
the wrong conclusions, but he knows what he's talking about at the very least. So, but still, these are not the smoothest transitions.
Hmm.
If I was reading this guy's script, like if he wrote this as an essay, I'd be like, sir, you need transitional sentences.
Hmm.
Ugh.
most of the fights could have ended by Gamera shooting a fireball at close range. Instead, they choose to have the monsters do nothing, while hiding behind angles that make you assume something is actually occurring. The models in the Heisei
Okay,
Gamera
pause again.
Mm-hmm.
Hiding behind angles that make you assume something is occurring. He said that over a shot where we can clearly see what's going on. And then, but then there's also how he opened that with the Gamera could have solved all of this by shooting a fireball at close range. Yet, this is the, if I were writing the horror movie, the characters would be smart argument. Like, yes, there are characters who make dumb decisions in certain bad horror movies. I'm not denying that. But like, you ever see that scene from Community where they're parodying that and they go, "Don't worry, there's a killer outside, but I called the police on my fully charged cell phone, so we each have to grab a knife and stand back to back with the lights on until they get here." And that's, and people, I mean, it's a joke, but people have taken that like it's an actual critique. And it's like, any horror movie where that would happen, even one that's not poorly written, is a horror movie that would not be worth watching, because you've basically, by trying to prove that you do not write dumb characters. You've removed all the tension in the process. That you're not taking into account that there might be any number of variables that could potentially mess up that plan, or that they'll be able to do something that pull off the plan successfully, but then something else happens that they that happens after they think they're safe, or anything. Like, imagine for a moment if Gamera did actually just land on the ground, walk up to his opponent without meeting any resistance, apparently, blast a fireball right in his face, and the enemy falls over dead. Woohoo! How exciting! Like,
I was gonna say, this guy clearly doesn't understand that that's not dramatic.
Yeah,
It's just not dramatic. It's the same thing I hear people say, like, well, why does an Ultraman just show up and shoot the monster with the Specium beam? Because that's not exciting.
yeah. And think about it this way. Here's another way to look at it. That I mean, I am a very manly man, but I also watch a lot of classic musicals. And
this is a judgment-free zone here.
Yeah. Well, really great musicals have really great dance numbers, and really great dance numbers have a trick of some sort. Something the dancer does that is really extra impressive, that even with all the other fancy footwork, that makes you go, wow, how did he do that? Imagine for a moment if the actor just walked out, did the trick, and then walked back. You've removed the entire dance number. You've got the impressive trick. It might still be an impressive trick, but you've removed a major piece of entertainment in the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the trick. It's about the build up to the trick.
Mm-hmm. It's a case of, I would say, suspension of disbelief and willing just to go along with a trope.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you right now, you watch, and it doesn't have to be a kaiju fight. You watch a movie fight scene and then watch a UFC match.
Mm-hmm.
Those are not the same things. Or actually, here's a better comparison. Watch a UFC match and then watch a pro wrestling match. One is an actual real fight with real competitors who are trying to take the other one out, or a boxing match for that matter.
Yeah.
Pro wrestling, that's a performance art. It's only supposed to resemble a fight scene, sort of. That is about drama.
Yeah.
The other one is a competition.
Stunts,
what?
They're still doing real stunts. I mean, you can't fake being dropped off a ladder, but it's clearly scripted. Mm-hmm. All the same, and it's scripted to be dramatic, to have that build, that rise and fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I had another point. I was taking the characters as let's assume for a moment the characters are real people. In that scenario, are they necessarily going to be thinking that rationally?
Yeah.
Like, again, the horror movie, the example, when you're afraid, your rational mind isn't on full function. When you're in the thick of a fight, you're looking for an opening, sure, but because you're also trying to dodge attacks as well, you might miss something. You might not think to take an opportunity that you didn't realize was there until 3 moves later, or anything. You might have been beaten so silly you don't even remember where you are. Mm-hmm. There are any number of factors that could be placed in here. I can even think of how, I mean, you actually, as we were building up to this, you mentioned Gamera doesn't shoot fireballs at close range because it's a long range attack.
Yes. Yeah, it is a long range attack. That's like someone saying, oh, wait, I have a gun. I should totally not shoot anything, get myself up close and personal, and shoot him at point blank range. You're assuming you're going to get close enough to actually do that. Mm-hmm. Also, guns are typically less effective at close range.
Yeah.
Now, if you can put the gun right at the guy's, make contact with the guy's chest, pull the trigger, sure, you can do a lot of damage, but you still got to get up there to do it.
And even then, like, there is such a thing in fiction as close quarters gun combat called gun kata, but that again, that's like
John Wick, anyone?
Yeah, but again, that's like you try doing that in real life. It's highly impractical. It's all for the entertainment experience.
Exactly. So it's just so ridiculous. But here's my other thing, and this is something that just dawned on me. This guy says, "Well, this is such a problem. Gamera could have solved the problem if he had just shot him point blank with a fireball." How often does Godzilla, this guy's hero, apparently the immaculate Godzilla, how often does that happen? I can't think of too many times where Godzilla says, "You know what? Maybe I shouldn't shoot him from all the way over here. I'm going to get in his face and shoot him." There's a few times where that does happen, but it doesn't typically happen.
Yeah. Plus, that Gamera's fireball is clearly does qualify as a finishing move, because if it makes contact, it blew up the Gauss at the end of the first movie. But again, like, if you're a good writer, you're gonna find a reason why if a character leads with their most powerful attack, it doesn't work. Final Battle of Legion, Gamera leads by spitting fireballs. Legion uses some kind of energy shield to disperse them, so it didn't work. Your Ultraman example. There's an episode in the classic Ultraman series where it's the second time the Baltons show up. The Ultraman's first move is to shoot the Specium beam. Balton deflects it. Even like back then, they had an answer for why he doesn't lead with it.
Yeah. And like I said, if this guy's this is a common rebuttal that I give to people when they're giving an argument. If you're going to criticize something based on this criteria, you have to use it for everything else. You can't just use one set of criteria for one thing. In this case, when you're talking about a kaiju movie, you can't just apply this criteria to this kaiju movie, but not apply it to other kaiju movies. So if it's a problem that Gamera doesn't shoot a monster point blank with a fireball, then it's equally as much a problem if Godzilla doesn't blast a monster in the face at point blank range with his atomic ray. So I'm going to tell you right now, that rarely, if ever, happens.
Or if the Jaegers in Pacific Rim do not use their most powerful weapons to dispose of a kaiju immediately. Or anything else. If King Kong doesn't immediately grab the T-Rex's jaw and wrench it open.
Sometimes if you're fighting something, you might figure out a little bit later how to actually do the damage that will make you win. Anyway, moving on.
Are the main thing people talk about when comparing the Heisei Godzilla and Heisei Gamera films. The models are highly detailed and look realistic. If Gamera was supposed to be 40 meters tall, and not 80 meters tall like the film says, Gamera is consistently shown throughout the 3 films to not be much taller than 10 stories tall, and his design having a huge head and wide body doesn't help make him look giant. Heisei Gamera is supposed to be 80 meters tall.
This is where we seem to have a bit of a dispute about the height issue, because he keeps saying Gamera is 80 meters tall. You've looked it up. According to several sources, you say that is accurate.
Wikizilla, I looked up Wikizilla and gives the official height as 80 meters.
Well, I swear, you go and watch Gamera Guardian of the Universe, English dub or Japanese with subtitles. The one time they mention how big Gamera is, they say 60 meters, which is his height in the Showa films and Rebirth. Not in The Brave, but that's a younger,
smaller.
Yeah, that's smaller. A younger one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there is a bit of a dispute there. Like, the best I can think of to reconcile it is either 80 meters is a retcon, or maybe it's like in the Monsterverse where Godzilla got bigger between 2014 and 2019, and they don't technically mention it in the movie, but
my guess would be it could have just been a character giving an estimate, and again, characters are allowed to be wrong.
yeah,
It could have even been a small oversight on the screenwriter's part.
yeah, but again, he says that's what they say in the film, and the only time it's ever mentioned in the film, the number 60 is used. I will bet my bottom dollar on that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, like I said, it's an estimate. Remember the context. It was an estimate. It's not like they strapped Gamera down and measured it, made him like when we were kids and mom and dad were like, how much did you grow this year? And, you stand by the wall and then they put the little notch on the wall and see how tall you got. No, they're not doing that with Gamera.
And then people move into that house years later and they know some level of detail about your life that you never thought they would.
Unless you paint it over. But so, and if that doesn't sound like, well, actually levels of nitpickery enough for you, it gets worse.
The same height as Godzilla in 1984, and almost twice the size of Showa Godzilla. The miniatures at one point have Giles' whole head fit inside a train.
What?
Almost twice the size of Showa Godzilla. Godzilla's 50 meters.
He qualified it by saying almost.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, so that's allowed.
Meanwhile,
so that's allowed, but characters making guesses and being wrong.
Yeah, I know.
A train car easily fits in Godzilla 1984's hand, and a whole train car fits inside Gojira's mouth, with Gojira being 50 meters tall. This lack of...
Okay. What I am about to say is not to say that the evidence that he is presenting is wrong. What I want to point out is that he is making an assumption here. He is assuming that the scaling in Heisei Gamera is wrong, and the scaling in, we'll limit it to the one he actually shows, Return of Godzilla from 1984 is in fact accurate.
Yeah.
That's the only way that this argument works. And just to show how ridiculous I am, unfortunately, I've lost the article where I did it, but I looked up train car sizes. Train cars are kind of huge. Passenger train cars average about 65 to 85 feet, sometimes as long as 100. And by that, if we go off of that, by that average, I'm going to back this clip up here a little bit. I'm sorry. That doesn't look like that does not look big enough to me. Because if we're going to say we'll round up. If that's 100 feet long and this Godzilla is supposed to be 80 meters tall, there should be about, you would probably get about, doing the math in my head, it would take like 2.5 of those to be as tall as him. Basically. That doesn't look like 2.5.
But
looks like it would take at least 3.5, maybe.
But making it smaller does make him look bigger and more dramatic.
That's the point. Yes. These movies will pay attention to scale, because the reason they made Godzilla taller in the 80s is because the buildings got taller. And they're like, if we stick with his original size, he's gonna look puny. So we need to make him look bigger. But that doesn't mean that these filmmakers won't take some creative license, again, for the sake of drama. And guess what? That goes all the way back to Willis O'Brien in 1933 with King Kong. It was an intentional choice on his part. Kong on Skull Island is shorter than he is in New York. And they did that on purpose because They wanted the New York City scenes to look more dramatic.
And you don't necessarily consciously register it as you're watching it. Even when you know that fact, you can still watch the movie and you're not necessarily immediately going to tell the difference, but you still can recognize the dramatic aspect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to pause for a second. I got a comment here from Kaiju Otaku Scribe that I just want to highlight. He says, "This is the best dissection of anything I've seen in a while." Thank you, sir. But my point being that, yeah, like you said, that shot looks dramatic. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I am totally okay with that. Now, if we knew, I will admit that there has to be at least a level of conscientiousness here. So if we knew that Godzilla, like if this was Kong, okay, if this was like 1933 Kong, he's supposed to be 25 feet tall, and suddenly he's picking up train cars that are that size, okay, you lost me.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. But as long as it's within reasonable limits, we can go along with it.
Or if you've got some level of excuse, like I don't know if you've watched Gendy Tartakovsky's Primal yet.
No, not yet.
It's not for the faint of heart. Do not eat before watching it. But it's animated, obviously, so there's a little bit of a difference. But there are some shots where characters will change size depending on how big of a threat they're supposed to be. So character sizes and creature sizes can be all over the place in that show, but you recognize when it's done for a particular purpose. Like at one point, Spear the caveman can be small enough to fit inside Fang the T-Rex's mouth, and another scene, they can both look practically the same height as they're being dwarfed by whatever is after them. But it's only for certain shots to emphasize this is a threat.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to do it for an artistic way, you got to, I mean, that would be the way to do it.
Right. And also, like I said, if it starts getting wildly inconsistent,
yeah,
that can break the verisimilitude. To give an example, and I'm thinking of this because I just published an episode about this movie. Wang Mogwai, Space Monster Wang Mogwai, the once lost South Korean kaiju film from 1967. Okay. The scaling in that film is all over the freaking place. Because there are points where Wang Mogwai is apparently large enough that a Korean child can crawl into his eardrum and even fall out of his nose, fall out of his nostril. But Wang Mogwai's hands are apparently small enough that a full-grown woman and the said child can basically sit comfortably in the palm of his hand and fill the entire palm.
Yeah.
That doesn't quite work. Okay. And so, like I said, the scaling, that's all over the place. So that can take you out of it. But if there are just a few shots here and there where, like in this one we're seeing right now, I mean, to be honest, I mean, even if we're, like I said, if we're assuming those cars are 100 feet all long, they clearly are not long enough to get to, to like stack up 2.5 of them to get to his height. Maybe if they were smaller than that, maybe, but we don't know. But again, my point being, he's assuming the scaling is right. We don't know.
But the audience isn't supposed to make assumptions. But the audience isn't supposed to make assumptions based on what the Gamera movies gives us, even though he says that's what it's expected.
Right.
And a whole train car fits inside Gojira's mouth, with Gojira being 50 meters tall. This lack of proper scaling is shown throughout the films, but is blatantly obvious in Gamera Guardian of the Universe, with Gauss's head fitting in one story of a building, showing chairs and office equipment be half as tall as his head. And
I know you had something to say about that.
Kaiju can have different proportions. Gauss has a very flat head. So who's to say it couldn't fit within one story?
Mm-hmm.
A scene such as the 2 shots showing a human be the size of Gamera's hand,
Okay, I'm sorry.
with Gauss's head fitting in
Hold
one
on,
story
I
of a
backed up
building,
a little too
showing
far.
chairs and office equipment be half as tall as his head. And a scene such as the 2 shots showing a human be the size.
That is not the size of his hand. I'm sorry. He says, "Oh, they're the size of his head." That is not the size of his hand. Okay, that is not even King Kong 33 proportions there. If Gamera was to actually palm those characters right now, they would just disappear into his fist.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what he's getting off with that. Plus, like you said, different proportions. Gamera does, just because Gamera is 80 meters tall doesn't mean he has giant Shaq hands. All right, comparatively. His hands actually in Guardian of the Universe are actually a little smaller than they are in the rest of the movies.
Yeah. And nothing compared to in Rebirth, where he's practically got flippers.
Yeah, he's totally smacking people around in that one.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So again, proportions. You can't just go on a flat height.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's just like with people. Okay? There are you can have somebody who's like like we'll say a basketball player. He's 7 feet tall and he's rail spike thin. All right. He's got a really small frame, narrow rib cage, and he's really lanky, and that's why he can run around and he can dunk a ball. And then you have Andre the Giant, who is a mountain. He's thick. He weighs 450, 500 pounds. He was a gigantic man, but he's the same height as the basketball player.
He was literally a giant.
Yeah, exactly. That's why he's Andre a Giant. Yeah. And if you looked at their hand sizes would be different.
Mm-hmm.
Probably. And even if because the basketball player is probably going to have thinner hands. Even if their fingers are the same length, he's probably going to have thinner hands. Andre's hands were meat.
Yeah. I mean, even you don't have to look at a giant. Shaquille O'Neal's shoes are said to be huger than most of his contemporaries. And he's not technically a giant as far as I know.
Yeah, no, I think
but he's still big.
I think he is in the 7 foot range. He's a tall guy.
Yeah.
But still, it's just, oh my gosh. Anyway.
Size of Gamera's hand are so bad that even the Showa Gamera films did that better.
Those don't even look comparable to me.
Yeah.
Because that hand looks smaller to me.
Yeah. And like he is acknowledging it's a shorter Gamera, if indeed he's right about the height size. Anyway, but it's still the proportions do look. In fact, we can see the whole lighthouse right next to him, but we can see Kenny there looking really big compared to that lighthouse that they're next to.
Mm-hmm.
And he said this movie did it better.
Yeah. This is the weirdest thing. Normally he's just been standing Heisei Godzilla, mentioned Showa in passing, and then I think I don't remember if we've seen it yet or not, but he'll mention a Millennium movie in passing. I didn't realize that he until this point watching the video, I was like, wait, when did he suddenly become a Showa Gamera stan?
Well, it's going to come up later, but
yeah,
we'll get to that.
And this goes for how big Gamera looks overall. In the original 1965 film, Gamera looks giant, despite him only being 60.
Oh yeah, he totally looks huge in that.
Yeah, he
looks totally huge with this nice straight flat shot that's from just a straight on angle. Oh, he looks so massive.
Looks tremendous next to those Hot Wheels.
Oh my gosh. I mean, just look at that. Look at that. Totally looks bigger than what looking at a supposedly larger Gamera from a low angle. Because you know how you make something look huge? You film it straight on at a flat angle. I feel so enlightened right now, Ryan.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I've been doing it wrong this entire time. Oh my gosh. Come the
I mean, you can actually, it just occurred to me, you can even tell the difference in our own camera angles. Your camera's kind of down and angled up at you. Mine's above me coming down. Which of us looks taller?
Huh?
In real life, I'm taller than you, but right now,
how tall? I was gonna say, how tall are you?
I'm like 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah, you are actually taller than me. Actually, you're because I'm about 6'1".
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we met at G Fest.
Yes.
But you know, based on the camera angles, right now I look smaller compared to you.
I mean, come on. I learned that doing close-ups or low-angle shots is what you do to make something look. I remember back when I was trying to be a YouTuber, I did this funny little skit where I took an old robot toy that I had, and I wanted it to look like a Pacific Rim mech. So what did I do? I filmed it close up or at low angles, and I did what tokusatsu directors do. I slowed it down. I slowed it down a little bit so it looked heavier. Whatever. Anyway.
Meters tall, with even the edits in the Heisei Gamera films making him look incredibly small.
Oh, yeah, those edits right there. Those edits look so tiny.
Yeah.
So tiny, man. So tiny. Because he's got stuff in the way that gives perspective as opposed to having, nothing in the foreground and a straight shot, flat angle.
This is like the way he's talking about this, you'd expect it to be a cartoon where suddenly what looks like a wide shot is actually completely flat, and one of those people in the foreground will just reach up and pick up Gamera, and yeah, but that's not how this shot is supposed to convey that. Yes, he's in the background, which makes him not look as big as if it were closer. It feels like you can't win, right? If he's in the background, he looks too small. If it's a close up, you can't tell what's going on.
Yeah.
There's no way there's no victory against the paradigm he set up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comparing them to the Heisei Godzilla.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Look how small Godzilla is when he's in the background and there's a bunch of stuff in the way and the camera's down low.
So, Mr. GSTE, I don't think you picked the best clips to illustrate your arguments.
Edits shows how small they made Gamera.
Again, object in the foreground, lower angle. It's doing that. This is actually one of the better shots from the Heisei series.
Yes. And you want to know why? I bet it's because the guys at Toho watch Guardian of the Universe and they're like, hey guys, we need to up our game.
I don't know if that's possible because I thought Guardian of the Universe came out. Well, no,
it was in March. March 1995. Destroyer was December 1995.
Right, I remember now. Yeah, probably did have an effect. Curious though that it's okay here.
What?
Curious though that it's okay in the Godzilla movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I said, it's almost like some double standards are being applied here.
Yeah.
Huh.
One thing I consistently hear used to say that Heisei Gamera films are better than the Heisei Godzilla films.
And I love, again, he's specifically zeroing in on that, even though he has several times now used illustrations for his arguments that are outside of both of those series.
And just wait until you hear what I have to say in response to this one.
Is the budget. While converting for inflation, Gamera Guardian of the Universe had 4 times the budget than the original Gamera film. Yet the original still properly scales Gamera to humans and buildings, with them also not trying to hide the monsters with low angles or close angles not really showing much of anything, which leads to my main problem with these
Well,
films.
okay,
The
pause
fact
now.
that they
He did something very sneaky just there. He talks about how what people bring up is the budgets, and that's something that they use to praise it. But then he immediately shifts gears and compares the budget of Guardian of the Universe to the budget of Giant Monster Gamera. Which, yes, was lower even when you adjust for inflation, but he then uses that to make it look like Gamera the Invincible did better work with its lower budget than Guardian did with its bigger budget, when that's not why people bring up the budgets. They bring them up because the budgets for the Heisei Gamera movies were significantly lower than all of the Heisei movies, any individual one. Combine all of their budgets together, it still would not equal the budgets of half the Heisei series, the Heisei Godzilla series. And yet, arguably, the Heisei Gamera movies look so much better than the Heisei Godzilla movies, especially when it comes to how those monsters look. Like, one of the things people will generally say about these movies is the monsters look like real monsters. They don't look like guys in suits. Not that the Heisei effects are bad, of course. The Heisei effects are, I mean, they're not perfect. You can tell the Godzilla suit is kind of showing its age by the time Space Godzilla rolls around, sure. And of course, there's the fact that sometimes the monsters don't move that much because the suits are so heavy. But it's not that they don't, it's not that they're on the same level as like the Showa movies. But they still don't look as real as the Heisei Gamera movies. And the Heisei Gamera movies achieve that with a lower budget. That's what people bring up. That is why people bring up the budgets. But that goes against the paradigm. So he establishes what people talk about, but then he changes what the context is. He brings up something completely different, something that people don't talk about, and applies it. It's sneaky, but not sneaky enough.
Also, it just dawned on me. He says Showa Gamera is better than Heisei Gamera, despite having a smaller budget, which is exactly what people say about Heisei Gamera versus Heisei Godzilla.
Yeah. And weirdly, no one says about Showa Gamera versus Heisei Gamera except in this video.
Weird how that works out.
Anyway.
Yes.
they make Gamera himself worse than his Showa version in almost every way. In the original Gamera film, nothing could stop Gamera.
Again, horrendous transition there.
Uh-huh.
Like that was transition whiplash right there. Okay, he's just like, oh, whoa. New subject. Again, not the ADHD nightmare of Dr. Skipper, but still.
So anyway, he just brought up. Do we want to hear his whole point on this?
Yeah.
Back up just a smidge.
Gamera himself worse than his Showa version in almost every way. In the original Gamera film, nothing could stop Gamera. From electricity, the heat of a nuclear power plant, tank fire, missiles, and even a nuclear bomb. In the Heisei era, Gamera is knocked out by conventional weaponry, such as missiles and tank fire. And monsters like Legion had its arms cut off by even smaller missiles, making Gamera's attacks feel even weaker than an average missile. It's so bad that in trying to copy
the reason Gamera was so unstoppable in the first movie is because he's the antagonist.
Invincible, you might say?
Yeah. He's the antagonist. The general rule is the antagonist has to be a very difficult to stop opponent. It's not something you can just knock over with a feather. And from there, after that movie, did I mention at the beginning that the Showa Gamera films are some of the most violent children's movies ever made? It's largely because of what happens to Gamera when he's fighting those other monsters. He's getting impaled. He's got parasites stuck into his body. He has ninja stars cutting him up. He gets frozen solid at one point.
He gets his arm nearly lasered off.
Yeah, and that's because in those movies, he's the protagonist. And the protagonist has to have a struggle against the antagonist in order for the audience to get invested. Otherwise, there's no drama.
Also, the Heisei Gamera trilogy is tapping into those movies because the trope was Gamera will generally fight his opponents twice. He'll lose horribly the first time and then show back up and be like, I know how to beat you now.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, of course, the Heisei Gamera movies are a different interpretation from the Showa movies. So they don't need to be beholden to the exact same rules. This is akin to arguing that the Dark Knight trilogy is terrible because Christian Bale's Batman doesn't have shark repellent on his utility belt like the Adam West Batman does. Of course he doesn't. Different version of Batman.
I would totally love to see Christian Bale whip that. I was like, where are the other drugs? I have shark repellent.
Sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Robin, to the Batcave. Oh my gosh. I need this in my life now. Christian Bale, please say Adam West lines in your Batman voice.
Somebody did an Adam West mashup for The Batman. They have to do it for the Dark Knight movie too.
I need to find that one now too. Anyway, I mean, that would using AI to do that because obviously Adam West is no longer with us might actually be one of the few instances where I'd be like, okay, for incidental novel pieces of entertainment, go ahead and use the AI to do this just because it would be funny.
Mm-hmm.
Have an AI synthesize Adam West's voice, program in all of these other Batman lines, and then loop it over the that would be funny.
Be the Godzilla vs. Destroyer scene. They had the Legion crabs crawl over Gamera, making him bleed and knocking him out. The only difference from the Destroyer scene is that Godzilla was knocked down from multiple monsters that were able to handle tank fire, military attacks, and was able to even beat a smaller version of Godzilla, that being Godzilla Jr. The same monsters that knocked Gamera out can individually be killed by 9 bullets from a handgun.
Dude! First off, they're smaller than the Destroyers. So the fact that it would only take a handgun bullets to stop it is actually pretty reasonable. Okay, because if somebody took out one of the Destroyers, those smaller Destroyers with 9 bullets from a handgun, I'd be like, wow, that's either one heck of a handgun or you be a pansy. But also, I would like to point out, look at that thing. It's huge. It took 9 bullets from a handgun. That's practically an entire clip.
Yep.
This guy is unloading an entire clip into this thing before it stops. It's proportionate here. Like I said, if the handgun stopped a creature that's the size of a bus, okay, that's a little much. All right, but this is so bizarre. So
there's more. Yeah, were you done or?
Yeah, go.
Well, here's what gets me. He's arguing that because these smaller Legion are so much smaller and weaker, they cannot do damage in big numbers. Now, a single mosquito is relatively small and easy to kill. See it on the wall or on your arm, smack it, it's dead. If you were to be covered head to toe in mosquitoes, all biting you and draining you dry, I mean, assuming they even left any blood for you, that would leave you pretty weak when they all left. Just because something is small and not necessarily invulnerable to anything but the strongest attacks doesn't mean it can't do damage. And those bugs are literally all over Gamera in that shot. So,
and I would also like to point out that Godzilla was not in great shape when he was being attacked by those crabs.
Yeah.
He was practically dying of nuclear heartburn.
Yeah, so it's not that they took him over because they were stronger. They took him down because he was already dying anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, they might have still been able to take him down anyway, but you know.
Yeah, and just because they could withstand tank fire and all of that doesn't mean they would have been necessarily on a good day been able to stand up to Godzilla. Godzilla was not at 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's faulty too. But like I said, they're also larger than those legions.
Yeah. So it's not a fair
Not
comparison.
even destroyed.
Yeah.
His second form was that weak. But even just imagining these small destroyers being able to knock Godzilla out or make him bleed is ridiculous, just to say the least. Now this
the legions, that horde of legions couldn't take out Godzilla, man.
I mean,
they totally couldn't do it. Like I said, on a good day, yeah, he probably could have nuclear pulsed and incinerated him.
Yeah.
Yes,
like
I'm really showing my Godzilla nerd card here. But yeah, probably. But again, the illustrations he's using are not the best examples of his points.
They're not they're not really comparable. There are all kinds of things that make them not. You can't draw a straight line between one and the other.
No. All right.
This isn't even mentioning the underutilization of Gamera's other abilities. In the Showa era, flight is used as one of Gamera's main advantages, with him using it creatively to defeat the monsters. He uses his fire close up when the monsters can't run away, and he thinks before he attacks. That is literally the opposite of Heisei Gamera. In the Heisei Gamera films, he tries to shoot his fire far away from the monster. He runs headfirst into the monster, grabbing onto them, until eventually he gets stabbed or knocked down. And this is done in every single film. And when Heisei Gamera is presented with the opportunity to use his fire breath, he makes the dumbest decisions. Like in Revenge of Iris, after his hand was impaled by Iris, he just stood there for literally 2 minutes. And then after all that time, he decided the best decision would be to cut off his arm. Literally every other option was better than the one he chose. Good examples being from Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Godzilla Final Wars. Imagine if Godzilla was as intelligent as Heisei Gamera.
Okay, before we get to the final part of his point here, again, his examples are not comparable. Now, the last one he's going to show is reasonably comparable, but these first two are not.
Yeah.
Because the Mechagodzilla one he brings up, that's just a traditional stabbing. Mechagodzilla sprouts a blade, Predator style, and just tries to hit him with it.
Goes into this part of his arm. It's not going through him, it's going in. It's not even necessarily going straight in. It's at an angle. It could just be under the skin.
Yeah. It's just a flesh wound.
And as far as Godzilla Final Wars goes, I mean, again, that can kind of circle back around to his argument of Gamera could have solved all of his problems if he used his strongest attack first. Godzilla Final Wars does that with most of its fights. And pretty much the only reason why that movie gets away with it for most fans, I think, is because there are so many of them. If Godzilla had just disposed of Gigan in that first fight, and then there were no other kaiju fights until he gets to Tokyo and fights Monster X, would there be the same level of forgiveness? I don't know.
Yeah. I also think it was meant to be kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, in that case,
it was the first one. It's meant to be a little bit humorous, but the other thing is that he's bringing that up. Yeah, but the other thing he's bringing up with that one is that that's not even comparable, because the point was that Gigan was shooting cables at Godzilla to tangle him up. He's not trying to stab him. Now, I think the idea was he's like, I'm gonna pull a scorpion. Get over here! Like, I'm gonna get tangled up. I'm gonna drag you to me, and then I'm gonna use my big sharp leather daddy claws to hurt you.
The buzzsaw.
Yeah, the buzzsaw.
His abdomen buzzsaw.
Yeah. So that might have been the intention, but that's not what he was attempting.
Yeah.
At that point, that's a that one is, we could throw the Final Wars right out, because that one's not even the same tactic.
Yeah.
So I want to point that out. We've already explained the whole deal about not using the fire breath constantly. And so he tries using Gamera tries using the fire breath up close in the older movies. It also had a shorter range.
Yeah.
Now, part of that was not part of that. That was mostly due to special effects limitations. They couldn't, and they didn't. Daiei didn't have an optical printer like Toho, where they could just animate rays, which is what they did with Godzilla. That's why he could use his from pretty far away.
After they stopped
had
using
to
aerosol.
use what?
After they stopped using aerosol, like in the earlier movies.
Right. In this one, in the Heisei Gamera, in Showa Gamera, they had to use real fire. They put a flamethrower into a prop Gamera head and just had it spit fire out. So it's not going to have as good a range. Gamera's fireballs can fly all over the place.
Yep.
I just thought of that now. That's the only reason that the close-up flamethrower, the close-up fire breath even is a thing in Gamera, is special effects limitations.
But also there's the do we let him finish the blowing off his hand thing?
Yes, we're gonna get to that because like I said, this is when we get to a comparable part. But good lord, yeah.
Gamera, when he was impaled by Bylante, he would have cut off his own hand instead of literally ripping out the thing that stabbed him. Now, one of the main things I don't like from Heisei Gamera
that's
is the fact that they don't.
Okay. Let me give you a visual illustration of this. Okay, so here we have, where is this, the Gamera stabbing? Where's the Gamera stabbing?
All that time, he decided the best decision would be to cut off his arm.
Okay, this is not the best. Okay, it's not the best illustration. Okay, so this is literally a spear. Okay, this is an appendage on Iris. It's a spear.
And we should remind you, of course, Iris is facing towards Gamera.
Right.
He showed clips showing that.
Yeah. So, because it's a spear, it's sharp. As far as we know, it's only sharp at the point. It's not sharp on the edges. So it's not like Gamera could just rip his hand down.
Looks relatively dull, even.
Yeah. That's still going to inflict damage, but would still be less than blowing his hand off. Sure. But so it's like I said, he couldn't just rip it off. Gamera is also not in a great position here. It's not like he can just go over and grab this appendage and yank it out.
Yeah, his body doesn't work that way. It's a shell. His hand's out to the side. Won't be able to reach.
Yeah, he's also having his energy drained, so he's in a weakened state. Even if he could reasonably get a hold of this thing and theoretically have enough leverage to pull it out, he probably doesn't have the strength to do it. And also, unlike, this is pinning him to a wall, and we can, I think, safely surmise that Iris is still pressing into that. So it's still applying pressure to keep it there. So, given all of that, it makes sense that Gamera, in desperation, would just blow his hand off. This is like asking, well, if a wolf will chew its leg off if it gets caught in a bear trap, then clearly the wolf would bite his foot off if he got a thorn in his paw. Huh? Those are two completely different situations. Okay, so with all that in mind, again, I know this is getting into very nerdy, nitpicky territory here, but the problem, like I said, the problem that is that this guy is presenting arguments that just don't line up. These are not exactly the same.
Literally every.
All right, so then we get to the Godzilla. Where's the Godzilla example? Did I go too far?
When he was impaled by Bylante.
Okay, you saw that right there. Okay, so we've got a similar situation. We have a spear-like appendage going into a hand. All right. We're gelling so far, but here, look at the difference here. Godzilla's hand is not pinned against a wall. It goes into the palm, out the other end, very painful, but it's not pinned against a wall. So there isn't some extra force being applied to keep it in a certain spot.
And they're vines. They're relatively flimsy compared to what Iris has.
Yes.
Ante. He would have.
Yeah. So it clearly very painful, not pleasant at all. Also, Godzilla's body is set up differently. He's not having his energy drained, his vitality drained.
Mm-hmm.
So it does make sense that he'd just be like, ow, yank. Because he can actually get to it, get a good grip, and he still has enough strength to pull it out. It's so honestly, if I was watching this movie and Godzilla's like, oh my gosh, I got stabbed in the hand, I better shoot it off. I'd be like, that's absurd. Okay, that just, what are you doing? That would make no sense.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is the equivalent of, like I said, getting a thorn in your hand or getting caught in a bear trap. When you get caught in a bear trap, your options are pull the trap off or cut off your leg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When you've got a thorn in your hand, you just pull it out. It's not
cut off his own
comparable at all.
hand instead of literally ripping out the thing that stabbed him. Now, one of the main things I don't like from Heisei Gamera is the fact that they don't tuck in his arms like the old Gamera or like real turtles.
Oh, boy,
Instead,
that's fun.
they shoot smoke everywhere
Keep it going. Let him finish.
so that you can't see what's happening. And then they cut to a scene of him flying. This is one of the things I like least in the Heisei Gamera films. The original was creative, having the monster suit look like an actual turtle tucking into its shell. Where this one, they just literally cut to a different scene after having a smoke screen effect. And that's about it for all.
Okay. This is...
This is a creative choice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I agree. It's a creative choice. And again, it ties into the whole, they only had so much to work with in the budget. I mean, again, comparing it to the Showa movies, again, we're not knocking the Showa movies per se, but you have to agree they do not look as good. And sure, they had him look more like a turtle with pulling his shell, and pulling his head and his arms into his shell. But like with the Heisei movies, the whole idea of using the smoke screen and then cutting to him flying, that they chose to do that because that's how they could get from one version to the other within the constraints. I'm honestly baffled by the perspective here, because most people watching these movies wouldn't consciously think about that. Someone who wants to be a filmmaker, especially a special effects guy or a special effects filmmaker, would be picking this movie apart, seeing these different tricks of, oh, if you have smoke coming out of Gamera and you have it fill the screen for a second, and then as it fades, he's suddenly flying, they found a way to make it look like one shot when it's actually two. Hey, that's actually a really good idea. I need to remember that. That is something that the movie would be praised for figuring it out, that the filmmakers would get accolades for knowing to do that. I don't understand why in this particular video, he's looking at that same thing and saying it's bad filmmaking.
The other thing to keep in mind, the reason why it works, it's basically supposed to be a rocket or a jet.
Yeah.
When you ignite a rocket engine or a jet engine, they shoot out smoke like that and kick around a bunch of dust.
Look at any NASA launch.
So there's verisimilitude there. And yeah, it allows them to put up a smoke effect so they can then cut to a different shot with a different model. I see no problem in this.
Yeah.
It's a creative choice that works within parameters.
And like I said, they figured out how to do it. This is not a sign of bad filmmaking or lazy filmmaking. This is a sign of filmmakers who really wanted to get it right and found a way to do it.
Here's my other question. Does it matter that you figure out the trick if it still works. If it still looks good, but you know what the trick was, does that diminish it? My argument is no, it most certainly doesn't.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I know there are some people who say, "Oh, now that I have become a writer, I notice all the writing tricks, or now that I make movies, I notice all the tricks in other movies, and I just can't watch movies or read books anymore." I personally don't understand how anyone could have that mindset, because, oh, okay, so you know how it's done. You can recognize when it's done, and maybe even recognize when it's done well versus when it's done poorly. But can you really not rewire your brain long enough to just appreciate the story itself?
I mean, we all know, to use a really recent example, we all know all the monsters in frickin' GXK, Godzilla Cross Kong, The New Empire. They're all CGI. They were animated in a computer, and in at least a couple of cases, they used mocap to do it. Does it matter?
We've seen the behind the scenes of many recent superhero movies where they're not wearing the costumes, they're wearing onesies with styrofoam balls glued over them. We see the end result of a CGI outfit over them. Does that matter? We've seen the photos of the suit actors getting into and out of the Godzilla and Gamera suits. We've seen the photos of Willis O'Brien standing over the table, reaching for the King Kong figurine, or Ray Harryhausen doing the same with the Rhedosaurus or the Emir. So what? That means we can understand the craft. That means we can appreciate the people who actually did this stuff and put all of that effort into making it as good as they possibly could.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. I remember seeing something where I'm like, oh, I know why they did it that way. Like I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I have seen, I feel like I'm undermining my argument a little bit by saying this. I have seen media where, to get around to you doing, a special effects shot, they'll just use sound effects and have it happen off camera. That way they can save that. What?
That happens all the time. It happens
Yeah.
in action movies, cartoons, kaiju movies, TV shows.
That way they can save that money for when they want to, for when they actually do it for a big moment. That way they don't have to do it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I look at that and I think that's just a smart move.
Yep. It's I just cannot fathom how you would have to be thinking in order to look at all of that and think, what lazy hacks. This is just bad filmmaking. It doesn't add up in my brain.
It to be honest, it kind of reeks of armchair filmmaking.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. It's like, I would totally be, do this, and this, because I would have all the money in the world to be able to do whatever I wanted. Would you? Would you really? Yeah. Maybe.
All my points. Overall, this video was just to point out things I haven't seen anyone talk about. Due to certain...
Oh, I know. Wait. Well, first off,
we don't talk about them because they don't really affect our enjoyment of the movie.
It's also that just kind of reeks of, I know things that other people don't.
Yeah.
And also, I remember how I said early on that he at least had the courtesy to say, oh, here are screenshots of videos that with people saying Heisei Gamera is better than Heisei Godzilla, and he was at least nice enough to include not only the thumbnail but the name of the channel. Oh, now he's showing you the thumbnail for a video where from a guy who basically got the whole, maybe the Heisei Godzilla movies aren't as good as we remember discourse started but he doesn't tell you who it is. He just shows you the thumbnail and it doesn't say who it is because it's Blue Nova. I've podcasted with Blue Nova. Blue Nova is a smart guy. And I find it mildly offensive that he dares to say, like, well, some people just say they're not as good. And then he won't say, well, who's the guy who actually said it? Because, probably because you know why? You go and you watch his video and you realize, wow, he makes good points. So I'll acknowledge it, but I won't say who did it. Because this guy is a Heisei Godzilla stan.
Yeah, and it'd be one thing if he didn't acknowledge any of the channels that did it, if he just showed thumbnails, but he did show the channels at the beginning.
Right.
So,
it just feels disingenuous and inconsistent. Why show who did those other 2 videos, but not this one?
Certain people criticizing the Heisei Godzilla films, while praising the Heisei Gamera films without mentioning most of the major flaws. Despite this video being mostly negative, there are many things that
but these are not major flaws. Some of them are just objectively wrong.
Or they're just nitpicks.
Yeah, but there's nitpicks, which again, like, that doesn't really affect our overall enjoyment of something. But we've also gone through certain things that are just misrepresented or misinterpreted or omitted for whatever reason, accidental, on purpose, I won't presume. But that's why people aren't talking about them. They're not talking about these things because they're not true.
Yeah,
I don't know
anyway.
what to say on that.
the Heisei Gamera films did better than the Heisei Godzilla films, mainly with its special effects and quality of models.
Oh, he says that. He gives the, here's my small session. Here's what the Heisei Gamera movies actually did better. After I spend the last 12 minutes telling you how the special effects are actually inferior.
Yeah, again, inconsistent. It's like
These are just
it's like a little bit of lip service, but since he doesn't elaborate on it because we're at the end of the video, I mean, that's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But here we get to one of the most, honestly, for me, one of the most damning things in this video. Now, I saw somebody in the chat, Alice, saying, I'm getting Dr. Skipper flashbacks. You're about to get the most obvious one.
That's my thoughts on the films. I encourage you to look into the films yourself and come to your own conclusion. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.
Yep. Always important to do your research, right?
These are my thoughts on the movies. I encourage you to watch them and draw your own conclusions after spending 13 minutes telling you how much they suck.
And not
after going so far as to say they are unwatchable.
And in ways that if we actually do watch them, we're going to find that, not everything's going to hold up. In fact, practically nothing holds up in this video.
We got a follow-up comment here from Alice. She says, I'm screaming right now.
Yep.
It's so disingenuous. It's such a cop-out. So he spent 12 and a half minutes spouting all of this stuff out with what seems, the greatest of conviction. And then says, well, I encourage you to go watch the movies and draw your own conclusions.
Because the special effects are pretty good.
Even though I told you they weren't.
Yeah.
Just, my friend. Just stick to your guns. Even if they're bad guns. I could at least respect you if you stuck to them.
Yeah, it's a very baffling video.
I don't know. See, here's the thing. I'm having difficulty here because you and I and a couple of our group chats with some of our fellow content creators, we've been highlighting a few of these things because it seemed like there was a bit of a rash of them. There's also a rash of response videos. So I guess we're contributing to that with this, and which might be exactly what some of these people want. They just want the attention. But there were 3 that came out relatively close together related to Godzilla. I'm gonna stop the share here right now. Although really quick before we get into that, just to illustrate what I was talking about, in case anyone wants evidence of this, but look at this guy's channel. All right, this is his channel. And if we go down here to videos, notice a pattern. All right, so here's his latest one, which is the Gamera one. Could legendary Godzilla survive the Heisei era? How did burning Godzilla die? Also Heisei. Could legendary... Okay, that one, that's an exception. So this is a Showa one. The special effects of the Heisei Godzilla films. Is Gemstone Godzilla Godzilla Jr.? That's Heisei related. Why Heisei Godzilla is iconic? Could Heisei Godzilla defeat every Godzilla? Oh, that really shows bias.
He clearly has a preference for the Heisei movies.
Yeah.
And
cool scenes in Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Also Heisei.
And hey, if he likes the Godzilla movies from that time period, okay. It just seems odd, as we mentioned, that he doesn't allow concessions for the Gamera movies of that era, even when they're doing the same thing that the Godzilla movies did, or if they're doing stuff better.
Mm-hmm. We got Punk Otaku Scribe. He says, "Sorry, I had to step out close up at work. To close up at work. Did it get worse? I would say it did. Feel free to go back on the VOD to see what you missed."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it does. It does. As Alice pointed out, she was screaming by the end of it because it got pretty Dr. Skipper there at the end, which is why we're saying, well, we keep bringing up Dr. Skipper. So there were 3 of these kind of weird hot take videos that came out. One was Dr. Skipper, which was an ADHD nightmare made by a guy who admitted, I hate Godzilla. Every Godzilla movie is stupid except for -1, because I just saw -1 and I liked it. As soon as I heard that, I'm like, well, then why should I take anything you say seriously?
Then, of course, he said stuff like Godzilla's public domain, and he got his history wrong in some pretty drastic ways.
Yeah. But then we had a video from Nostalgic, which thankfully was not an ADHD nightmare, but
it was eerily similar.
It was similar, although I would say it was still not in nearly as bad a faith as Dr. Skipper.
It was pretty bad faith about some things, like saying that nobody at Legendary who works on the Monsterverse cares about Godzilla except for Gareth Edwards for some reason.
Yeah. And then we had one from, interestingly, from Accented Cinema. And while I'm subscribed to Accented Cinema, and I normally actually appreciate his perspective on things, because I believe, if I remember correctly, I think he's a Chinese guy living in Canada, so he has an interesting perspective to offer, especially when it comes to Chinese films and how they compare to American films and things like that. I do think he got this wrong. He made a video about Godzilla that tied into -1, and I think he missed a lot of the marks there. I was shocked how much he missed it when normally his videos are actually pretty, I thought, well researched and on point.
Yeah, there were so many that one video like that is weird. You know the old saying, once is an event, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. I mean, it was weird that we kept getting videos like that. There were some others as well, but those were the 3 big ones I noticed. And I mean, there's no foil inside of this hat, but it still was, it made me wonder, like, how can there be that many videos popping up that are all basically saying the same thing?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it was weird, but
yeah, the way I heard, I think it was Kaiju Canuck, I think, said this, another YouTuber who obviously is a kaiju fan from Canada, in case you didn't figure that out. But I thought he described it pretty well. He said these people are tourists. They're not fans. They're tourists. They saw -1 and they're like, -1 is cool. Everything else sucks, but -1 is cool.
Mhm.
I'm going to start saying things about Godzilla, even though I don't really know anything about it. And I think they all suck, but -1 is cool.
Yep. Not that
Yeah,
it
so
affected
they make a Godzilla film because -1 was a surprise hit, and they saw it and they liked it because they're trying to get the make the YouTube algorithm happy and get them clicks so they can get that money.
Mhm.
And that's the only reason they do it. It's very disingenuous. Like I said, at least with GSTE, he's a fan, but he's a fan who's just drawing a lot of the wrong conclusions.
Yeah.
So I give him more grace than I do most of these other ones.
And, there is also the argument to be had of it doesn't paying attention and responding to things like this only give it more attention. And to a certain extent, yes. But the counter argument to that would be that a factual error that goes unchallenged might be mistaken as a fact.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just say nothing and people start seeing it without seeing it challenged, they might come to believe it. And sure, we're talking about movies. You could argue that it's inconsequential, even though, ability to interpret art is actually important. But if they'll believe something that's not factual about something like a movie, what else might they believe?
For sure. For sure. Also, some people, even on something as quote unquote trivial as this, they need to learn that they can and should be challenged on these things. They can't just spout off whatever they want and then get upset when people don't agree with them.
So maybe GSTE should give those movies another look. See if he notices anything that maybe he missed or probably did.
Yeah, I have Punk Otaku Scribe says, like I said, media literacy is hard. Parentheses, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like I said, this is just not hard. I mean, I don't want to make presumptions about GST.
Right. Like we said,
But
we don't know him.
well, I don't know him, but I could be completely wrong on this, but I get the impression he wasn't even paying attention when he watched these movies. It's because there's so much of these things that he just completely missed. I mean, I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, can you? Because he sounds incredibly young. I will say he sounds incredibly young. I could be wrong on that, but he sounds incredibly young. And I'm just thinking, can you just put the phone down for a hot minute and actually pay attention to this movie? Because maybe if your attention was actually focused on it, you would have caught everything.
Although, again, the weird thing is that he also would have to have missed these things as he was editing. So, like, did they just sail past him, or was he intentionally omitting them? Again, I won't presume to know, but that's the sort of question that comes to mind when you see something like this.
Right. Right, because it's so easy to punch holes in these arguments. Like I said, like all you have to do is we could just look at the footage he's using.
Yeah.
It doesn't line up. So it's not a case of, he just didn't catch something while watching. I was like, no, it's literally right there. Look at it. I don't know. GST, if you're watching this or if you've been secretly in the chat this entire time, yeah, I don't know. I mean, feel free to leave some comments down below and, in response to that. I mean, I invite it. Omni and I would love to just have a discourse with you in the comments if you're feeling up to it. If not, that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to say anything to us. It doesn't matter. This this live stream can just exist as it is, and we can all move on with our lives. I've got plenty of stuff to keep myself busy.
Mhm.
The fact that I carved out 3 hours almost with my friend Ryan here to talk about this, I don't want to say it's a privilege because I could have spent that time doing a lot of other things, but we both felt that it was important to do this after this long rash of just crazy hot takes that are just coming out, and it's one thing to just disagree with somebody and say like, well, I don't like this movie and this is why I don't like this movie, and actually have reasonable arguments to say, well, this is why I don't like it.
Yeah.
It's another to just fly in the face of whatever it is, of whatever the movie is, and have demonstrably wrong points about it. That's why we felt the need to do this.
Yep. But again, we've done our best to focus on just the claims. So we mean nothing against GSTE personally. Again, we don't know him. We don't know what he's like away from his channel. We just felt like the claims being made needed to have some kind of a response.
Yes. So GSTE, no hard feelings, and please don't shank us at G-Fest. Anyway, any quick final thoughts before we wrap up this 3-hour lecture?
Well, yeah, we spent that long on a movie that's on a video
on a 13-minute video.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do, right? We talk.
Yes,
But
we do.
but if you haven't seen the Gamera movies for whatever reason, I certainly think you should. I think they are high water marks of quality. Like, people like to name their favorite trilogies. They talk about Star Wars, they talk about Back to the Future, they talk about Lord of the Rings. Those are all top quality trilogies. I think the Heisei Gamera trilogy deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as them. So if that doesn't get you intrigued, if maybe you're not a kaiju fan and you just happen to stumble across this, or you're not a Gamera fan and your only exposure to Gamera was the Showa movies, then yeah, these movies are great examples of how to make good movies. Not just good kaiju movies, not just good fantasy movies, just how to make good movies. And to think that Shusuke Kaneko got his start directing movies that weren't exactly family friendly, but so it also goes to show you just how far a person can come from where they started.
For sure. And, so I would recommend not only watching this trilogy, I'd also recommend Gamera the Brave. I'm a huge fan of Gamera the Brave, which is amazing for different reasons compared to this trilogy, and I think it's overshadowed by this trilogy quite a bit. So I would definitely add that one to the list as well. And if you're an anime fan, I think in particular you'll love this trilogy. It was written by the same guy who wrote Ghost in the Shell.
And of course, speaking of anime, there's Gamera Rebirth, which if you can get past how the human characters are designed and animated, which is not the best, you're still gonna be in for something really good. The human characters do not look the best, but despite that, the monster stuff looks amazing, and the writing is actually surprisingly good for something that you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be. And the Showa movies, again, we don't want to speak completely ill of them. They're cheesy, they're low budget, they're weird sometimes, in fact, most of the time, but they can still be a fun watch.
The final one, the infamous final one, most of it's stock footage, and it inexplicably features 3 hot Japanese chicks in spandex because they're superheroes. And one of them's a professional wrestler in real life.
And a Star Destroyer.
Yes. Now, she's not a Star Destroyer. There is a barely legal Star Destroyer knockoff in the movie because Star Wars was a thing at the time. It's weird.
I mean, it's still, I've heard it's still around, but
yeah,
you know, I wonder what he's been doing with it recently.
Yeah, that is a good question, but yeah. So anyway, just real quick, Ryan, where can people find you?
Right here on YouTube. You might actually already know who I am, but you know, just there, look for that Omni viewer right there. And you can also, once you're on that channel, you can find links to my other social media. I've got books up available on Amazon, as mentioned at the beginning. I try to make certain convention appearances whenever I can, not necessarily as a guest, but as a vendor or just an attendee. In fact, the next couple of weekends after this video goes up, I will be first at the Maine Comic and Toy Convention in Portland, Maine. And then the following weekend, I'll be going back to Portland, Maine for the International Cryptozoology Conference. And there'll be a whole bunch of cryptozoologists there like Lauren Coleman. So that'll be fun.
And just real quick from Alice here, does that mean Gamera and Star Wars are in the same universe? No. I said barely legal, as in just different enough that Daiei couldn't get sued.
Well, I don't know. Has anyone figured out if Star Wars and Gamera are part of the Tommy Westphall universe?
That's a good question.
You never
I don't
know.
have an answer for that. Anyway, but real quick, for those who may not know me, obviously I'm Nathan Marchand. You can find my author website, nathanjsmarchand.com, where you can learn more about my books or see me. Okay, sure. Yes, fine. That's fine. I know we were trying to have a little bit of fun with it ourselves, but you know. Anyway, if you want to learn more about my books or see me blog about any random subject that pops into my head, go there. And also check out my podcast, The Monster Island Film Vault, Henshin Men, which is about Japanese superhero television. That should be wrapping up here pretty soon. And also the Power Trip, A Journey Through the Power Rangers franchise, which is exactly what you think it is about. I hosted that with Michael Hamilton. Both of those shows will be doing a DBZ style fusion dance into a new show that should hopefully launch later this summer. And I'm also a member of the stable of actors for Carl Dutton at Scyther Media. I have played characters on both X-Men, the audio drama, and Power Rangers, the audio drama. So definitely check those out. So, you know, you listen hard enough, you'll hear me show up on both of those. And I'll be appearing actually in another one coming up. It'll be Avengers, the audio drama. I will be Johnny Storm, baby. So that should be fun. I think that's got basically everything. So go to monsterislandfilmvault.com or nathanjsmarchand.com and you'll get links to all of the important places like this YouTube channel. Well, both of these YouTube channels. All right. I think we've got everything. Is there any any quick comments I want to address here? Thank you, Punk Otaku, for following all the channels. Let me see. The Almighty Oreo King. This is his first comment, I think, from the night. The Tommy Westphall universe? What part of the multiverse am I in? Okay. Yep. What is this? I knew I shouldn't have gone through the dark ether portal. Oh no, that sounds horrifying. Anyway, with all that, unless more comments come in that need to be addressed, sayonara, everyone.
So long, folks.